You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 12th part of What If Deku Finds Ben's Watch Ultimatrix. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The music begins, and Midoriya charges forward, disappearing in a flash of green light, followed by the title. The other rising stars run after him. Behind the title, once they pass, everything crumbles away to darkness. When the light returns, the camera zooms out from a glare from Night Eye's glasses. He is sitting at his desk, studying something on his computer. He looks up and sees All Might, only for him to fade and turn into Lemillion, speaking to Deku. The scene changes rapidly between Genesis, Froppy, Uravity, and Nezu-chan with Ryuku, then Cellophane and Virtus with Ingenium, Triumph with Endeavor, and Alien Queen with Sky Dancer, Red Riot, Sun Eater, and Fat Gum. They all fade and are replaced with Iri, Deku, and Uravity. The latter two are holding her tightly and scream when she is ripped from their arms. The scene changes again, and the heroes are charging into battle. The big three, adult heroes, and most of the rising stars are fighting most of the 8 precepts, but Deku is facing Overhaul, while the League of Villains watches from the distance. Deku turns into NRG and unleashes a wave of radiation, which Overhaul dodges. Deku transforms into a beam of green light and races towards Overhaul, who is engulfed in shadow and blood. There is an explosion of green light, and when it fades, the rising stars are standing protectively in front of Iri, bloodied but unbowed as a wave of darkness crashes towards them, and the music cuts out. Zero wasn't sure why he was so nervous as he entered Ingenium's agency. After all, he had already worked under a pro hero. Maybe he was anxious because he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of his friend's brother. Hey, guys. Ingenium wasn't wearing his helmet, so his beaming smile was visible. Sorry I was a little late. You'd think someone with a speed quirk would always be on time, but it just seems to run faster than we do. Excellent joke, brother. Chenya chopped at the air enthusiastically, as expected of Ingenium. That wasn't a joke, it was a pun, Zero thought as he tried not to cringe. Am I going to deal with this the whole time I'm here? Suddenly, he was less worried about embarrassing himself in front of his friend's brother, and more concerned that he would be embarrassed by his friend's brother. Alright, boys, Ingenium said cheerfully, I'm gonna put you through your paces. Tenya, that means just running like normal, but I'm sure your friend will get into the swing of things. This time, Zero didn't hold back a groan. Much farther away, 2 men thought they had caught a serious break. After several days of casing the neighborhood, they had figured out the local heroes' patrol routes, and had robbed a convenience store. Sure, it wasn't too much money, but it was enough to get by for a few days, and they hadn't even needed to use their quirks. This is great, one man said gleefully. We should have tried this years ago. We had money years ago, his partner reminded him. Come on, let's scram before a hero shows up. Too late, criminals. The men looked up to see a teenage girl hovering above them. Neither of them knew what the swirling lights in her hands could do, and they didn't want to find out. Both drew pistols, only for one to get his weapon knocked out of his hand by a long tongue, while the other had his snatched away by a metal hand connected to a long cable. Nice shot, both of you. Before the men could turn to face the voice from behind them, they felt cold metal around their wrists. Another teenage girl had just handcuffed them to each other. Thanks, Genesis. A girl with a pink helmet and a metal arm took the guns and left them floating in the air. Very thorough, all of you. A fifth voice made the criminals wince. Not only had they been captured in less than a minute, they recognized that last voice. Ryuku wasn't supposed to patrol this area today, but then again, no one had said anything about her having so much backup either. A few minutes later, the criminals were hauled off by a police officer, and Ryukyu's team was soon mobbed by civilians. Ryuku, that was amazing. One fan gushed. For her part, the Dragoon hero shook her head modestly. Please, I was only supervising today. If anyone deserves praise, it's my interns. As if a switch had been thrown, all attention was on the teenagers. How long have you four been working for Ryukyu? Will she take you on as official sidekicks? Weren't you all at the UA Sports Festival? Are you single? Genesis went a little red-faced when a girl about her age asked her that last question, while Uravity and Nezu-chan laughed. In order, I had my first internship with Ryukyu over 2 months ago. I would like that, we were, and I'd rather not say. Well done, Ryukyu muttered to her, then turned to the crowd. Alright, please give us some space. I'm trying to teach these young ladies to be the very best heroes they can be. The civilians reluctantly went about their business, and the 5-girl team continued their impromptu patrol. How come I had to answer those questions? Genesis asked. Because we drew straws, Ribbit, Froppy reminded her. I have to answer the next round. Midoriya-chan shared a quick low five with Uravity. And we don't have to do it at all until tomorrow. I thought you would like getting interviewed, Genesis commented. Well, yeah, when the questions are nice, Midoriya-chan said with uncharacteristic cynicism. But people asking about my personal life. No thanks. Uravity was thankful of her helmet's tinted faceplate. It let her look around without being noticed before speaking again. Hey, speaking of which, how are you and Tamaki? Didn't you want to go on a double date with me and Deku-kun? Midoriya-chan's eyes sparkled. Right, I still do. Maybe during the work study, if we're not too tired, but definitely after. Ryukyu smiled fondly at her oldest intern, then cut in. Remember to keep the volume of personal discussions low, girls. That sort of information can be used to hurt you if the wrong person hears it. She paused. Though I am curious, Midoriya-chan, when did you and Amajiki start dating? Midoriya-chan blushed, and then began one of her favorite topics, talking. Triumph narrowed his eyes as he unleashed a torrent of fire. His target, a humanoid dummy, was incinerated, but no one was happy with the result. The blast radius is still too large, Endeavor grunted, and the pressure wave alone will cause damage to anyone nearby. If the target has a hostage, you need pinpoint precision. The man paused. However, you are getting closer. Another week of intensive training, and I'll consider teaching you the basics of flash fire. Triumph didn't let his excitement show. The flash fire technique was the basis for all of Endeavor's best moves, and it had been something he had willingly asked his father to teach him. Of course, that had meant even more grueling training, on top of the patrols he was scheduled for. Hey, I'm almost jealous. One of Endeavor's sidekicks, a woman with green fire for hair with the hero name of BEN10, handed Triumph a towel. I've wanted to learn the boss moves for years, but he's even more of a slave driver with you than he is with us. Instead of accepting the towel, Triumph briefly coated himself in the thinnest sheen of ice. His sweat froze and dropped away like shards of glass. It looked impressive, and had the added benefit of both cleaning off his sweat and cooling down after using so much fire. Show off, BEN10 accused, though her wide smile never faded. It reminded Triumph of Ishido's smile. But the sidekicks was fiercer, more aggressive, and just a little mean. Endeavor wants me to focus on my fire. Just because I've been training with only my ice until recently doesn't mean I should neglect it now. BEN10 shrugged. Not my problem. By the way, the boss wanted me to remind you that you might get pulled out of classes at any time over the next couple of weeks. That's outside of the patrol schedule. Yeah, but he's working a case with a few other agencies. If things escalate, he'll need all hands on deck. For all his issues with Endeavor, Triumph couldn't help but be intrigued. It was rare for Endeavor to work with other agencies, so whatever was happening could be big. Maybe it'll be a chance for me to test out my new moves, he thought. If that happens, it'll be worth working for the bastard. Alien Queen couldn't help but grin as she followed Sky Dancer through the Tokyo streets. True, she had gone on patrol with her before, but this felt bigger, more official, especially when other heroes they occasionally met waved at her. When Sky Dancer had accepted her for a work study, she had been almost as excited as the student. Apparently, this was the first time she'd had a work study student. Most interns saw her agency as a mere stepping stone, but work studies implied a more serious commitment. Alright, just another couple of blocks, and then we'll find a place to eat, Sky Dancer said, then looked at her phone. You know, if I remember his schedule, a friend of mine should be coming through here soon, and last time I checked, he's got a UA student as an intern or something. Oh, there he is. Alien Queen peered around her mentor, and her eyes went wide. Fat Gum was a popular hero, and had a friendly appearance. He was almost as wide as he was tall, with a yellow hoodie and black mask over his eyes that almost reached his perpetual smile. Standing next to him was both Sun Eater and Red Riot, who seemed just as surprised to see her. Hey, guys. Alien Queen waved at her friends. Hey, yourself, Red Riot said with a grin, while Sun Eater just waved half-heartedly. I thought you only had one intern. FG, Sky Dancer said as she skipped a few inches above the sidewalk to high-five the other hero. Yeah, but Red Riot here talked Sun Eater into bringing him to me for a shot. Fat Gum smiled at her, and then Alien Queen. This isn't intern season. Did you actually get a work study? Oh man, we haven't actually chatted in ages. Come on, I'll treat you all to lunch and then we can finish this patrol together. Free lunch. Alien Queen pumped a fist. Count me in. Hell yeah. Red Riot mimicked her and then dragged Sun Eater behind him. Come on, let's eat. Sun Eater whimpered. Why am I the only person here who isn't high energy? That evening, as Midoriya and Tagata waited for the car that would take them back to UA, the former was on his phone. Instead of All Might's face as his avatar, it had been replaced with a picture of the OMNITRIX dial. Hey guys, how was your first day? Comet, fun, but I'm so tired. Why did you change your picture, Deku-kun? Also, why not just ask us when you got back to school? Dial, it just felt right, I guess. And I thought I should ask before I fall asleep. Sir Night-Eye didn't have me do anything outside today, but he gave me so much to think about. Tagata looked over Midoriya's shoulder. Oh, you're talking to the others. Tell them I said hi. Dial, Mirio says hi. Frog, hi. Mirio, ribbit. Sue says hi. Tape, minus the ribbit. Frog, coward. Tape, I just don't want to lose my mind. Glasses, hello. Book, Sue, behave. And today was indeed exhausting. Thank you for asking before we all become irritable, Izuku. Snowflake, guys, has anyone heard from Mina? She was supposed to be back before us, but I'm at the dorms now and she's not here. Snowflake, wait, Aizawa is here. I'll ask him now. Tagata tapped Midoriya on the shoulder. Everything okay? You got all tense. Midoriya bit his lip. Mina isn't at the dorms yet, and Shoto is worried. Huh, okay. Tamaki was complaining that she was bugging him earlier. Let me see if he knows. Tagata pulled out his own phone to ask his friend. It took several minutes for Amajiki to reply, and as Tagata read the extremely long text, his eyebrows rose dramatically. At the same time, Midoriya's phone buzzed. Snowflake, she's at the hospital, talk later. Snowflake, Aizawa says she'll be back in an hour. Snowflake says it's not serious. Tagata looked over Midoriya's shoulder again. Okay, you know that much. Tamaki just gave me some details. Midoriya took several deep breaths. Well, what happened? 4 hours earlier. How did you even eat that much? Alien Queen asked her mentor. You put away more than Momo after she makes a cannon. Sky Dancer grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. See, heroes on patrol usually don't get to eat very often. Unless you're lucky and it has something to do with your quirk. Fat gum cut in. Or that. But for the rest of us mortals, we might go 12 or more hours without something to eat, so we need to stock up on the calories while we can. Even if I don't burn it all off during work. I usually like to wind down with a long dance routine at my agency or at home. It's good exercise and it's fun. I just convert it all into muscle by using my quirk a few dozen times, Red Riot, who had eaten more than the other 2 students combined, boasted. That and a good workout a couple times a week, and I'm set. Sun Eater shrugged. Most of what I eat goes into my quirk, so I don't have to worry about overeating. Alien Queen bit her lip. Note to self, if I have to eat that much, spend more time dancing like Sky Dancer. Hey, a shout from across the street made the heroes turn. They saw a police officer chasing after a large group of men. Stop them, they're drug dealers. Come on, one man called back. We're just trying to make a living. Take him down. Fat Gum ordered. He was still smiling, but there was a seriousness to his tone that made his interns immediately move. Remember, this is a work study, Sky Dancer said as she and Alien Queen joined them. You have permission to do whatever is necessary to safely stop those criminals. Yes, ma'am. A moment later, Alien Queen skated forward on a trail of her weakest acid and kicked one man in the head. Sky Dancer skipped overhead and dropped onto another, then lashed out with a fist to a third's temple, knocking him out instantly. The rest were taken down by Fat Gum and Sun Eater, and a small crowd quickly gathered to cheer the heroes on. That was so cool, Red Riot said to Alien Queen. You moved so fast, it was over before I could even do anything. Alien Queen could see that he was mostly happy for her, but he was still a little disappointed. Hey, I was training a lot with Sky Dancer, but also Midoriya and Mirio. I might not be as good as them, but I think my reflexes are pretty good now. Red Riot nodded, mostly to himself. Yeah, I've been focusing on defense, so I guess the next step is working on my speed. That's the spirit. Alien Queen playfully elbowed him. Maybe you'll get fast enough to not need to take so many hits. It would be cool not to get my costume repaired all the time, Red Riot said ruefully. How come you don't have any problems? Alien Queen gestured to her costume. Acid-proof material. I actually custom order a lot of my clothes made from stuff like that. Really? I didn't know that. My sweat is kinda acidic, so I have to look out. She saw the glint of metal in the cheering crowd, held in the hands of a scruffy-looking man. She heard the roar of the gun, but she was already moving. Her decision was based on instinct. Sun Eater was closest, so she tackled him to the ground. Fast though she wasn't faster than a bullet, and she felt something hit her shoulder. It doesn't hurt that much, she thought, even as the crowd screamed and ran. Shouldn't it hurt more? Am I in shock? As it turned out, she hadn't been hit by a real bullet. Instead, she pulled a small red projectile with a needle on one end out of her shoulder. It was then that she felt an itch, but not on her skin, rather, it felt like it was in her very blood. Then she looked at her hands. With horrified fascination, she watched as her pink skin became pale, and there was a sharp pain in her scalp as her horns retracted into her skull with a sickening tearing sound. The pain and shock made her sink to her knees. She barely felt Sky Dancer's arms around her shoulder as the older woman tried to keep her upright. Alien Queen. Alien Queen. Ashido, can you hear me? For a moment, Red Riot and Sun Eater were rooted in place as their friend went from completely pink to a pale-skinned brunette. Then, Red Riot growled. You son of a, he cut himself off as he ran after the shooter. Get back here. Red Riot, wait. Fat Gum shook his head, then turned to Sun Eater. Stay here with Sky Dancer. Explain the situation to the paramedics. I'll go after Red. Fat Gum was many things, but fast wasn't one of them. By the time he caught up with Red Riot, the student had visibly changed. His body had hardened so much that he looked more like a demon that someone had roughly carved out of stone, and was steadily marching through an obscene amount of blades shooting out of a scrawny man's body. Then, with a bellowing war cry, Red Riot smashed the man into the ground. Even from some distance away, Fat Gum saw a handful of teeth go flying. Nice work, Red, Fat Gum said as he jogged over. I think he's down. Yeah. With a creaking sound, Red Riot deactivated his quirk and looked at his mentor. How's Ashido? Is she okay? Fat Gum heard the sound of sirens. The paramedics should be looking at her now. Come on, let's make sure this guy gets his own private ride to the hospital. Careful, Red Riot warned. He injected himself with something. It made his quirk superpowered. Fat Gum frowned as he picked the man up. Sounds like trigger, nasty stuff, but it'll wear off in a few minutes. I'll just give him a big ol' hug while he gets it out of his system. True to his word, Fat Gum held the man against his belly, letting him sink into his fat. He felt blades poke him, but his quirk let him absorb the attack with little more than a tickle. Fat Gum chuckled to himself. He never got tired of street thugs who thought they could hurt him with conventional attacks. By the time they got back to the others, the police were loading up the other criminals. However, much to their concern, Alien Queen was going into an ambulance. How's she doing? Fat Gum asked as he handed over the last criminal. They took her vitals, Sky Dancer said, her neutral tone telling everything Fat Gum needed to know about her state of mind. She was okay on that front, but her quirk is gone and so is everything related to it. They're taking her to the hospital to make sure it isn't permanent. I'll go with her, Red Riot volunteered, but Sky Dancer shook her head. That's nice of you, but I'm her mentor, I'll do it. Besides, you need to stay with Fat and tell the police everything you saw. You'll also need to write an official report later, but Fat can help you with that. Sure, saddle me with more paperwork, Fat Gum joked, but then he got serious and patted his friend on the shoulder. You'd better get going. Let us know when she recovers. Yeah. Sky Dancer's smile was patently false. Only if you don't eat your phone. One time, and you never let me forget it. 20 minutes passed in a blur for the students as they answered the police officers' questions about the incident. Sun Eater had been through it all before, but even he looked exhausted by the end. I never knew being a hero could be this stressful, Red Riot said as he sat down on a bench. I had less trouble fighting that guy with the trigger. Speaking of which, that has me worried. Fat Gum idly chewed on a candy bar as he thought. Trigger-related incidents are on the rise, which makes things a whole lot more dangerous, both for cops and heroes. How come? Red Riot looked confused. Sure, that guy I fought was strong, but I still took him down. Because you had a quirk that could withstand his, Sun Eater said, even though he didn't look in his direction. If someone like Sky Dancer had taken a hit from that guy, she could have been hospitalized, or worse. And Trigger doesn't just make you stronger, Fat Gum added, it gives you a serious high. Quirks can be dangerous as it is, but when the person using that quirk becomes stronger and loses their self-control, that's a disaster waiting to happen. We're lucky that we haven't had a serious incident yet. What really worries me is this new drug, the one they shot into Alien Queen. Quirk suppressing tech has been around for a long time, but it's one of the most heavily guarded secrets. If some drug lord figured out how to replicate it, or even make it permanent, Fat Gum looked worried. We could be facing a serious problem. Now, anyway, I was fine after an hour, Ashido said with a wide smile. They kept me at the hospital for a little while longer, but I'm back to my regular pink self. What she didn't mention was how her scalp had burst with twin fountains of blood when her horns had sprouted again. Her friends had been worried enough as it was. We're just glad you're okay, Yaoyorozu said as she handed the other rising stars cups of tea. Yeah, Todoroki had yet to let go of his girlfriend, who could still feel him trembling. Yeah, we're really glad. Ashido gave him a quick kiss. By the way, Sky Dancer said that we're gonna get pulled into some big drug-busting operation before my work study is over, so that'll be exciting. Ribbit, Ryukyu told us that we were requested for something involving Trigger. Asui tapped her chin. Does that mean we'll team up? It might not be just you, Ida said, and shared a knowing look with Zero. Ingenium also received a team-up request. He mentioned that it was from Sir Night-Eye. Todoroki finally brought his head up from Ashido's shoulder. Endeavor mentioned a team-up with Ryukyu, part of a wider operation. The rising stars looked at each other with growing excitement, but also anxiety. Hero team-ups usually included only a small number of agencies. 5 or more was extremely rare, especially with 2 from the top 10. Still, it was the first chance the rising stars had to all work with each other in the field, something they had all wanted at one point or another. Okay, there's a lot of heavy hitters getting pulled into this, Zero said. What's so big that it needs this kind of firepower? Midoriya was wondering the same thing. Night-Eye had told him that the case he'd be a part of was high risk, but he was worried that the people he cared for most, people who were as good as family to him, would get pulled into the danger with him. They're going to be fine, he swore to himself. No one is going to die. I won't let it happen. Quite brilliant. Shigaraki rarely heard such praise from the doctor, even if it was grudging. I had never considered this route before. My research has always been the improving of quirks, not their deletion. Do we need to be worried? I doubt it, so long as you keep these Yakuza from using them on you. However, I suggest you do everything in your power to destroy these weapons. Shigaraki raised an eyebrow. And why shouldn't I just let these Yakuza fight the heroes for a while? Maybe they can depower a few of them for us. Simple, because these bullets' effects are only temporary. I would guess that the 8 precepts haven't perfected the technology yet. Shigaraki had only asked the question out of curiosity. Even if the anti-quirk bullets weren't a threat, he would destroy everything Overhaul had on principle. Consider it done, Doctor. I already have a plan. That's excellent. Let me know if you require anything from me. I will, but I don't think it'll be necessary. Shigaraki glanced over at the rest of the league. I have everything I need. You sure you don't want us to just go in there and tear them apart? Dabai asked. They're a bunch of thugs. Maybe, but those bullets of theirs are a problem. Shigaraki grinned behind the hand on his face. I'd rather let the heroes do the heavy lifting for us, and we can swoop in and claim what's ours. Just in case, though, here's what I need from you all. The next day, Night-Eye was waiting patiently in his office as Midoriya and Tagata entered. Good, you're right on time. Sit down. There are some matters to discuss before I let you out on patrol. The 2 students obeyed, their backs ramrod straight, though Tagata kept up his bright smile. You know about the incident in Tokyo last night, Night-Eye stated, rather than asked. The quirk-suppressing bullet, and the association with Trigger. I planned on filling you in on the details at a later date, but events are now in motion, and you need to be prepared, especially with new evidence that has come to light. First, Trigger is produced by several criminal organizations, but over 90% of it is created and distributed by a single group, the Yakuza, known as the 8 Precepts of Death. Night-Eye turned his tablet around to show a picture of a man with a bird-themed mask. This is their current leader, Chisaki Kai, also known as Overhaul. Tagata raised his hand. Sir, if we know who he is, why hasn't he been arrested yet? Truthfully, it was because the police wanted a rock-solid case against him, and it's only recently that enough evidence has come forth to connect the Trigger to the 8 precepts. Additionally, Chisaki's quirk is exceptionally dangerous. There was the briefest flash of amusement in Night-Eye's expression when Midoriya pulled out a notebook. His quirk, also called Overhaul, lets him deconstruct and reconstruct anything he touches. He can kill you in an instant, then resurrect you just as quickly. That, combined with his utter disdain for human life, means that any attempt to detain him will result in casualties, unless handled with utmost care. Midoriya looked up. That's why so many hero agencies are being asked to team up with yours. Night-Eye nodded in approval. Yes, Chisaki also has several individuals with powerful quirks at his disposal, and both the police and heroes are receiving files on them, so that we can be prepared during the raid. Sir, you mentioned new evidence. Tagata leaned forward. I assume it's important enough to tell us. Night-Eye nodded again. Yes, however, before I say anything, I want a solemn oath from you, Midoriya-san. Night-Eye stared into Midoriya's eyes. I want your word that you will not fly off the handle. If you cannot remain in control, I will remove you from this case. Is that understood? If he's singling me out like this, he knows it's going to make me upset. Still, Midoriya nodded. During his lessons, he had been told more than once that, as a hero, he would almost certainly see things that would give him nightmares. I promise. Good. Night-Eye brought up another file on his tablet, which included the odd bullet that had hit Ishido. The quirk-suppressing bullet. The police examined the chemical makeup of what was inside, and found that it was organic. Specifically, it came from a person. Midoriya frowned. Did they weaponize someone else's quirk? In a way, in fact, we already know who it is, since their DNA was put into the system a few months ago. Night-Eye paused, as if preparing himself, and pushed another button. Midoriya felt his stomach drop when the tablet showed a picture of Iri. The DNA matches the girl you rescued. We have deduced that Chisaki was the one holding her, and was converting an element of her quirk to rewind the quirks of others. It seems that the bullets produced thus far are flawed, and can only temporarily delete a quirk, but I believe that Chisaki plans to create a permanent version. Midoriya only barely heard the man's words. His mind was focused on Iri and the many scars she bore. Pieces clicked into place. Whatever Chisaki had done to get Iri's DNA had not been gentle, and had left the girl scarred in body, mind, and spirit. He's the one who hurt her. Midoriya had never truly hated anyone before. Even Bakugo at his worst had only made him angry for a few minutes. However, Chisaki Kai was the first person Midoriya had ever actually wanted to kill. It wouldn't be hard, he realized. Burn him to ash with heat blast, freeze him solid with Arctic guana and shatter him into a million pieces, possess him with Ghost Freak and walk him into traffic. Midoriya. Night-Eye's raised voice brought him back to the present. He looked down and saw that the Omnitrix's sheath had activated. Sorry, he mumbled, and the Omnitrix deactivated. I understand that you are upset, Night-Eye said. Chisaki is a monster, and nothing would make me happier than to see him locked in a cage for the rest of his life. However, we must act as the law dictates. To do otherwise would make us vigilantes, and we would be just as guilty in the eyes of the law. That doesn't mean we have to like it, Tagata added. Trust me, we've all been there at some point, heroes and police both. You'll feel better once Chisaki is behind bars. Midoriya doubted that. He would probably only feel better once Chisaki was in the ground. Night-Eye studied the younger student for a moment, then continued. It will take some time for the police and various hero agencies to be prepared for the upcoming raid. We also need to confirm where the trigger is being manufactured. I have some suspicions, but in order to be absolutely sure, we will be investigating all known 8 Precepts bases. Until then, you will continue your training. He paused. Additionally, you are not allowed to discuss anything you've learned today with anyone not associated with the investigation. This time, Midoriya had no problem agreeing with that, since everyone he wanted to talk to were already involved. He also wanted to reassure himself that Iri was okay. That evening, Tagata made sure to walk Midoriya to his dorm. Like the younger student, he had been exposed to all the gory details Night-Eye had on Iri's case, and it sickened him. He had seen bad things before, but the repeated torture and exploitation of a little girl was more than enough to turn his stomach. Tagata was a good person, but even he couldn't help but imagine putting his fist into Chisaki's face, with one for all at full power. You good, freshman? He asked, just before they reached the dorm. Midoriya gave him an uncharacteristic glare. What do you think? I meant, are you good to keep going on this case? Tagata patted him on the shoulder. Seriously, I've never worked on something this bad, and you got tossed into the deep end in your first year. If you want to take a step back, let me take the lead. To his credit, Midoriya actually thought about it. No, I want to do this. I won't be able to sleep well while Iri and that man are both breathing free air. Tagata smiled. Well, let's hurry up and catch him so that you can get a good night's sleep. He turned away. Good night, Izuku. Try not to keep everyone up too late. Midoriya nodded, then entered the dorm. Most of his class was milling about, either doing homework or chatting about their work studies. Of the rising stars, only Irinaka, Shiro, and Ida were present. Deku-kun. Irinaka ran up and hugged him. Welcome back. Her first clue that something was wrong was how hard Midoriya hugged her back. It was desperate, like she was the only lifeline keeping him from sinking into the abyss. Deku-kun, did something happen? Tell the others to meet in Momo's room, he whispered. You need to know about this. Get Kirishima, too, he's involved. It took only a few minutes to find and gather everyone, and by the time they assembled, they could tell that Midoriya was not doing well. For the rising stars, they hadn't seen him that apprehensive about telling them something since the first time he returned from seeing BEN10. Yaoyorozu gently put her hand on Midoriya's shoulder. Izuku, what's wrong? Midoriya took several deep, shuddering breaths and then began to speak. He couldn't bring himself to repeat the gory details, but he gave them the basics that they were all part of the task force to bring down the 8 precepts, the connection to trigger, and the anti-quirk bullet, but more importantly, about Chisaki and Iri. Even without the details, knowing who had hurt Iri was enough to make even masters of self-control like Todoroki and Asui see red. All the rising stars loved that little girl, and she had won over almost everyone else in the dorm as well, so Kirishima looked ready to storm the 8 precepts base himself. We need to be prepared, Ida said quietly. I am certain that our mentors will push us physically, but we should make plans. Contingencies. Yaoyorozu nodded. I agree. If Sir Night-Eye has been investigating these people, then it's likely that he has files that would help us. It took Midoriya a moment to respond. He had been lost in the memories of what Night-Eye had told him, and Irinaka was making it worse by nearly crushing his hand with her metal one. Like her boyfriend, she loved Iri like a little sister or a daughter, and was imagining all the pain she wanted to inflict on Chisaki. I think you're right, Midoriya said. I'll ask next time I'm at his agency. By this point, Ashido had brought her legs up to her chest, and had been staring blankly at her knees. Hey, Midori, about what happened to Iri. Midoriya tensed, and Irinaka scowled. What about it? You didn't tell us everything, right? It was worse than you made it out to be. I did, Midoriya confirmed. Trust me, you don't want to know everything. Ashido winced. That bad. Midoriya thought back to Iri's scars and what he now knew of Chisaki's quirk. Worse, Shiro grinned. It was wild and fierce and wouldn't have been out of place on Bakugo. So, we're crushing these guys, right? I mean, if we get a chance, we go for it. Absolutely. Everyone jumped at the steel in Midoriya's voice. And we're going to do it right, as a team. Exactly, Ribbit. Sui had a menacing glint in her eyes, which were at odds with her otherwise blank features. We all hold Chisaki down and take turns beating him into paste as a team. There were some weak chuckles, but none of them had anything more to add, and after a couple minutes, they headed to their own rooms. Irinaka would have held on to Midoriya's arm as long as possible. She didn't want to seem clingy, but after the horrors Midoriya had hinted at, she needed something to steady herself. But Kirishima coughed to get their attention. Hey, Irinaka, can I borrow your boyfriend for a minute? I just want to say something. Irinaka managed a weak smile. Is this one of those man-to-man things? Kirishima laughed. Kinda. Alright. Irinaka gave Midoriya a quick kiss. Good night, Deku-kun, see you tomorrow. Midoriya waited until his girlfriend rounded the corner. What's up, Kirishima? Well, Kirishima hesitated. I know I'm not like the others. I'm not as close to you as they are, I mean. But I'm thankful that you told me all that now, instead of whenever we get briefed. You didn't need to include me like that, so, thanks. Midoriya shuffled in place. And no problem. It was the right thing to do. Besides, you really stepped up when Mina was in trouble, so bringing you in made sense, I guess. Kirishima laughed again. Does that make me part of the Deku squad? The what? Far away from the prying eyes of heroes, the League of Villains had come to a decision. Or, rather, Shigaraki had come to a decision, and it just so happened to be one that the entire league supported. We're destroying them, Shigaraki said. He leaned back in his raggedy chair as if it was a throne. I don't care if they end up in jail or in the ground, but the 8 precepts is going to burn. 9 shrugged. If we get drawn into a major battle, we'll have to contend with the heroes as well. Those thugs might be trash, but they have numbers that can tie us down. Chimera jerked a thumb at Twice. We've got numbers too. Not happening, Shigaraki said firmly. The heroes know about Twice. They get one whiff of him, and half of Japan will come crashing down on us. Regardless of what happens, he's the shield that keeps us safe if we have to retreat. Twice puffed out his chest. You can count on me, Shigaraki. None of you are going to get caught so long as I'm here. Toga scowled. If we're not going to fight, how are we gonna avenge Magni? Shigaraki grinned at her. You know, I found a new appreciation for a certain feature in some games when 2 enemies are busy fighting each other. Even if they don't kill each other, they'll be weakened, and during the fight, I can study their moves for the next encounter. Knowledge is power, right? Well, I plan on being very powerful. It didn't take long for Class 1 to realize that almost half their number was acting strangely. There was an odd tension between them. And at first, some worried that the close-knit Deku squad had had an argument that had somehow pulled in Kirishima. They quickly realized that the opposite was true. The rising stars had drawn even closer, almost never leaving each other's side unless they had to. Gyro had been the first to broach the subject with Yaoyorozu, and wanted to know if there was anything wrong. To everyone's relief, Yaoyorozu had assured her that it had something to do with the work studies, but they weren't allowed to talk about it. Everyone else assumed it was just the stress of the job and went on with their day. Only Bakugo didn't bother to care, mostly because he was too busy working on his makeup test for his provisional license. The stress it caused him made him even less approachable than normal. Several days after learning about Iri, Ashido was the first to crack when the rising stars were visiting the little girl. It took all her willpower not to burst into tears, and settled for hugging Iri for all she was worth. Iri looked at Midoriya in confusion. Is Auntie Mina sad? Ashido bit her lip to hold back a sob. Several weeks ago, Iri had started calling the rising stars her aunts and uncles. The only exceptions were Midoriya and Irinaka. To their embarrassment, Shiro had joked that she wouldn't call her parents her aunt and uncle. Midoriya struggled to explain without going into details that might reopen Iri's trauma. Mina had a bad time a few days ago. We're still new to being heroes, so we're not used to some of the bad stuff. Iri nodded in the understanding way only little children could, and hugged Ashido back. And supposed to do this, right? Now it was Irinaka's turn to hold back tears. Yes, Iri-chan, that's exactly what you should do. The sweet moment lasted a few more minutes, and then Nezu poked his head into the room. Excuse me, Midoriya-san. May I speak to you outside for a moment? Midoriya stood up, but Iri grabbed his hand with a worried expression. Don't worry, Iri-chan, I'll be right back. Iri nodded, but still looked concerned, so Yaoyorozu concentrated and created a coloring book from one arm, and a fresh box of crayons from the other. Here you go, Iri-chan. You can show Izuku some new drawings when he comes back. Iri immediately grabbed the presents and opened them up, and Midoriya mouthed a quick thanks to Yaoyorozu before leaving. Nezu took him down the hallway to avoid potential eavesdroppers before speaking. Midoriya-san, I've been made aware of Iri-chan's past, and how you and your friends will be part of the raid to take those monsters down. Midoriya wasn't a violent person by nature, but just the thought of Chisaki still made the OMNITRIX activate, and he almost turned into wrath out of a desire to punch something, preferably Chisaki's face. Yes, sir. I regret to say that I cannot do much to alleviate your anger. In fact, I share it. Nezu paused, and Midoriya figured he was thinking about the scientists who had experimented on him. However, if it helps, I plan on implementing additional security for Iri-chan until this situation is resolved. Midoriya blinked. That actually does help, Nezu-sensei. Thank you. Nezu smiled. Sadly, because of the secretive nature of the upcoming operation, I cannot have more heroes assigned to her. I did, however, convince the police to send an experienced detective over prior to the raid. He spent much of his career dealing with the Yakuza, and might be able to help Iri-chan remember any useful information. But every time Iri thinks about what happened, she starts to panic, Midoriya protested. That's true, but Detective Ishigami assured me that he will be as gentle as possible, and if he or whoever is assigned to watch Iri-chan believes she cannot handle it, he will stop. Nezu smiled again. He said that he's had much practice interrogating his grandchildren when he wants to know who ate the last cookie. Midoriya chuckled. He sounds nice. Thanks for this, Nezu-sensei. I think this will make us all feel better. Tagata grinned as he blocked a punch from Midoriya. Had this been a real fight, he would have used permeation, and Midoriya would have turned into one of his aliens. But Night Eye had decided that Midoriya needed a crash course in fighting without any powers. To his credit, Midoriya hadn't complained, and threw himself into training. His form was still a little rough around the edges, but his foundation was solid, and at this point in his education, that was essential. Remember to follow through, Tagata reminded him. You can't get discouraged when your first strike doesn't win the fight, right? Midoriya said tightly, then ducked under Tagata's guard and threw another punch. Tagata leaned around it, then had to tuck and roll to avoid a kick that would have connected with his head. Not bad, kid. He then swept his own leg out to send Midoriya sprawling. But you've got to watch your opponent's whole body. A slight tension in the legs could signal any number of attacks. Got it, Midoriya groaned, and accepted the helping hand Tagata offered. And remember, just because you've got superpowered A, Tagata paused and looked around. I mean, superpowered forms doesn't mean you should take any fight lightly. You can never know what quirk someone might have. Midoriya's right hand drifted to the crisscrossing scars on his left arm. Right? Tagata elbowed him. Okay, training's over for today. Grab your costume, maybe a patrol will clear your head a bit. I'm glad you finally saw reason, Chisaki said genially. I know we got off to a rocky start, but I'm sure working together will smooth things out. Shigaraki nodded. That's what I told my people. They weren't happy, but they're loyal, and they trust me to see the bigger picture. Besides, I figured that little skirmish will show all our underlings that neither side should be messed with lightly. Chisaki leaned back in his chair. So, you can make rational decisions. Shigaraki shrugged. The perfect picture of contrition. I haven't been in command as long as you. I'm bound to make mistakes every so often. Now, what do you need for me to hold up my end of the bargain? For now, I need some extra muscle and numbers to beef up my security. Chisaki laced his fingers together. I want twice 9 Chimera and Slice. In return, you'll have full access to my trigger stores, financial backing, and premium access to my secret weapon when it's completed. To his credit, Shigaraki seriously considered what Chisaki was offering. You want most of my heaviest hitters. Are you trying to call down every hero in Japan? I'll lend you some of Twice's clones, it's the next best thing. And they can make extras of anyone you need, as long as he remembers how to make them. I'll also loan out Slice and Toga. Chisaki frowned behind his mask. Toga, that girl with the blood fetish. She's one of my best operatives, and she works best from the shadows. I thought you'd approve. Fine, fine. Just be sure that Twice can make a clone of Kirigiri. I may need his portals as a contingency. Sounds good. Shigaraki had no worries that Kirigiri would betray him. Clone or not, his loyalty was absolute. If you need extra backup, we're a portal away, but if you do make that call, I want something extra in return. Chisaki shrugged. That depends on what you want. Just information. I know you Yakuza types have connections to a lot of the older cops, so if they learn anything regarding the League and pass it to you, I want you to send it my way. That's reasonable. Chisaki stood, and Shigaraki mimicked him. Have your people meet mine here tomorrow. Shigaraki waited until Chisaki was gone, and then allowed himself a smile. He and Nine had discussed Chisaki's behavior before the meeting, and had agreed that mirroring the man would keep him from getting too suspicious. It had taken him considerable effort not to just lunge forward and disintegrate Chisaki's face, but he had reminded himself that the 8 Precepts leader had plenty of human shields, and Chisaki himself could kill him faster than decay would destroy him. So, Shigaraki settled for paving the way for the heroes to do the work for him. A little infiltration here, a little sabotage there, he preferred the direct approach. But he'd long since learned to do whatever was necessary to achieve a goal. All for One would have approved of this operation. It forced Shigaraki to learn patience, to let his enemies and rivals fight it out with minimal effort on his part, and to savor the victory when it came. Tell Team Spark to settle in. He instructed Kirigiri as he walked through a portal, and let Team Dragon know that they'll be burning the house down very soon. Sir Night-Eye resisted the urge to sigh. He hid it well, but even he had a limit to how much bureaucracy he could handle in a single day. And since he was taking the lead in a joint operation between the police and more than a dozen hero agencies, well, there was a lot of red tape. I know that look, Gran Torino said as he hobbled into the office, deliberately, because Night-Eye knew damn well the old man pretended to be decrepit as a bad joke. Paperwork finally weighing you down. If you ever bothered to fill out your own, you would know, Night-Eye said testily. And this is only half of the workload. Centipter is handling anything that doesn't require my direct approval. Gran Torino scoffed. Back in my day, we only needed a few signatures, and that was after the crisis was averted. Back in your day, heroes were outnumbered by powerful villains almost 10 to 1, Night-Eye snapped. The crises have slowed down enough for the bureaucracy to finally catch up. Hey, that's your problem, not mine. Gran Torino hopped onto a chair and held out a file. My contacts got back to me, the details are all in there, but I can give you the short version. Putting it simply, the League has made contact with the 8 Precepts. Night-Eye's reaction was to adjust his glasses. That is potentially catastrophic. Do we know how the meeting went? Badly. Fatalities on both sides. Gran Torino idly fiddled with his cane. Thing is, the underworld chatter is making it seem like they're talking again. They might have decided to bury the hatchet and make a deal. Then whatever they are collaborating on is serious, even if it has nothing to do with the quirk-destroying bullets. Night-Eye finally accepted the file. The psychological analyses on both Shigaraki and Chisaki suggest that neither wants to work with a potential rival. Either they have come to an understanding, or one is simply using the other until it is no longer profitable. I hate it when the villains use their heads, Gran Torino grumbled. Give me street crime any day. Those punks are too stupid to find their own asses with a map. Charming. Night-Eye's phone beeped, and he glanced at it. Mirio and Midoriya will be back from their patrol momentarily. Either leave, or do your best not to corrupt them. Gran Torino grinned. I make no promises. Your golden boy already treats me like I'm his grandpa, so I can get away with anything. While Night-Eye silently lamented ever introducing his protege to the crazy old man, the door slid open, and the interns walked in. We're back, sir, Tagata exclaimed loudly. Everything was quiet on our route, no civilians in need, no villain activity. Good to hear, Night-Eye said. The last thing we need before a major operation is a brawl right outside our headquarters. He paused. Oh, Midoriya-san, this is Gran Torino. He was All Might's instructor during his first year at UA, and close friend of All Might's predecessor, Shimura Nana. Midoriya blinked rapidly, and then bowed. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Gran Torino slowly walked forward, his expression stony. "Ah, the respect you show is appreciated, young man, and I shall endeavor to give all the wisdom I have gained in Miik." And the other shoe drops, Night Eye thought as Gran Torino dropped his cane, grabbed his chest, and fell to the ground. "Oh, my heart," the old man wheezed. It hurts, it hurts." Midoriya began to panic. What do we do? Should we call an ambulance? Wait, I'll turn into Shock Squatch. Maybe I can defibrillate his heart, or... Gran Torino's pained wheezing turned to hysterical laughter. "Oh, that was better than I could have hoped for. Kid, your face just made this whole tick worth that online acting class." Now it was Tagada's turn to laugh. "That's hilarious. That was better than when we first met and you were laying on top of a puddle of ketchup." Midoriya was just confused. What? Might I sighed. Gran Torino is fond of practical jokes that involve his age. If he ever starts acting like a senile old man, ignore him, he's just doing it to annoy you. He sighed again. Despite his antics, he is extremely competent. When he's serious, you should pay attention to what he says. Gran Torino dusted himself off and gently smacked Midoriya on the thigh, the highest part he could reach without needing to jump. "Relax, kid, I'm just yanking your chain. I heard you were upset about what that punk Chisaki did to the girl, so I thought I'd mess with you a little." Night Eye watched as Midoriya's expression briefly turned thunderous, but then he took several deep breaths to calm down. Night Eye silently approved. Even if Midoriya's emotional state was fragile, he still maintained the presence of mind to use breathing techniques. He idly wondered where he'd learned such a useful thing at his age. "With all due respect, sir, I'll feel better when Chisaki isn't a threat to anyone," Midoriya said through clenched teeth. Gran Torino huffed a short laugh. "Yeah, you and everyone else on this raid, especially when they find out what that bastard did to the girl." He glanced at Night Eye. "You're telling him today, right?" "Correct." Night Eye leaned back in his chair. "The official briefing will happen in 2 hours, and assignments will be handed out an hour later, once everyone has had a chance to process the information." Midoriya tilted his head. "Assignments. If this raid is to be successful, we need to be absolutely sure that 1. The entire leadership of the 8 precepts is in one location, and 2. That we are not walking into a trap." Night Eye locked eyes with Midoriya. "Remember that you only have a provisional license. Do not speak unless directly addressed, and with my permission." Midoriya nodded tightly. "Yes, sir." "Good. You have 2 hours to prepare. Your friends will be here before then, so your job is to keep your fellow interns occupied until the meeting begins." Night Eye went back to his desk. Dismissed. Despite being told over and over how quirks could easily be used to hurt people, Yaoyorozu had never truly considered how her own powers might be applied in a more lethal setting. That changed after Midoriya had told them about Chisaki and Iri. Since then, her mind had been filled with thoughts of how she might put a more permanent end to that monster. By the time she arrived at Night Eye's agency, she had come up with over 80 scenarios involving things she could make. Number 47 involved bear traps, dental drills, and a wood chipper. That one was her favorite. She wasn't the only one seriously wondering how they might kill Chisaki. She had spotted Ida looking up just how much force one of his kicks needed to snap a human neck, and Ashido had been overheard muttering about how she would melt Chisaki from the feet up as slowly as possible. It was Irinaka that scared her the most, though, after Midoriya had told them everything. That wouldn't traumatize them. At any rate, Irinaka had gone oddly calm whenever Chisaki was brought up. Yaoyorozu was honestly worried that Irinaka had decided that she actually would kill Chisaki, if given the opportunity. For everyone else, she was mostly convinced that they were all venting, and wouldn't cross that line. Mostly, several hours before heading to Ruku's agency, she had woken up in a fit of giggles after dreaming about Scenario 47. "Hey, guys," Midoriya said as the interns walked through the door. "How are you doing? I think we all needed to get that anger out of our systems," Ashido said, answering for all of them. "I feel better than I did a couple days ago." "Sorry about that." Midoriya hung his head. "I didn't know any other time to tell you." Ashido was first to hug him. "Hey, it's okay, Midori. We'd be more mad if you didn't say anything." Irinaka gently nudged Ashido out of the way so that she could hug her boyfriend. "Izuku, we love Iri-chan just as much as you. Telling us was the right thing to do, even if it made us upset." Midoriya leaned into her embrace. "Thanks." Despite what she knew was coming, Yaoyorozu couldn't help but smile. Seeing those two show affection for each other never failed to warm her heart. "Hey, where'd the pros go?" Kirishima asked, breaking up the moment. "I swear they were right behind us. They went to discuss logistics with Sir Night Eye," Ida reported. Ingenium informed me that we will not be in our costumes during the meeting, since we are not going into an active situation. Ashido pouted. "Oh, I like wearing my costume. It makes me feel cute." "You're already cute," Todoroki pointed out. Ashido stuck her tongue out at him. "That's not going to work on me, Buster. How about a date after the raid? Dinner and a movie." "That works, but only if our resident lovebirds join us." Ashido winked at Midoriya and Irinaka, then grinned at Zero. "You can't come until you confess your undying love for Tsu." Without missing a beat, Zero turned to Asui. "Want to get some coffee sometime?" Asui didn't even blink. "I'd like that, Ribbit. We can go after we're done with Chisaki." Ashido looked between them, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You two were planning this, weren't you? You were just waiting for the perfect moment to spring it on me." Zero grinned at her. "You'll get nothing out of me. He asked me out last week," Asui said blandly. "It was in the library. Did you kiss him?" Ashido pouted when Asui and Zero refused to make eye contact. "You did. You kissed, and I missed it." "Oh, that's not fair." Yaoyorozu giggled, but stopped when Ashido turned her attention to her. "Don't even think about it, Mina. Unlike everyone else, I prefer to keep my love life, or lack thereof, to myself." "You know she just sees that as a challenge, right?" Todoroki asked. "Plus, if you don't have a date, you can't join the rest of us for date night," Irinaka joked. "Don't you like us? Your pouting only works on Izuku," Yaoyorozu said calmly. "Then why are you blushing?" Ashido teased. Todoroki came to her rescue. "Endeavor is one room away. The temperature of every room within 50 feet of him goes up by 10 degrees. That's why I set the thermostat so low at my house." Kirishima had been watching the entire conversation, completely fascinated, and turned to the big three. "Are they always like this?" Tagata nodded. "When they're not planning on kicking Yakuza butt all the time." His phone beeped, and he pulled it out of his pocket. "Looks like the briefing is going to start soon. We'd better get in there before all the good seats are taken." Aside from the heroes with interns, over 20 other agencies were represented in the briefing, along with a detective with a thinning hairline. Counting the interns and psychics, as many as 70 heroes were going to be present for the raid, and that was before taking the police into account. "Greetings," Night Eye said from his seat. "You have all been asked to join this operation because you either have extensive experience dealing with street crime, or dealt with cases involving trigger. This drug, which has been plaguing Japan for nearly a year, can be traced almost entirely to one organization, the 8 Precepts of Death, a Yakuza group that has recently been regaining strength." Rocklock, a dark-skinned man with green and yellow costume featuring locks, leaned forward. "The Yakuza? I thought those guys went extinct years ago." "Most did," Night Eye confirmed. "However, several groups went underground and have been biding their time. The 8 precepts are notable for 3 things: their trigger production, the number of individuals with powerful quirks, and now a new drug that can temporarily disable the quirk factor entirely." That last piece of information caused a ripple of murmurs from the heroes not in the know. Sky Dancer stood up and nodded. "It's true," she said. "My intern was hit by this quirk-erasing bullet. Not only could she not use her quirk, it even undid the secondary mutations it gave her. According to my sources," Night Eye continued, "the 8 precepts are attempting to make the effect of these bullets permanent. If that happens, it could mean the end of hero society as we know it. Any criminal with enough money could purchase these bullets and render a hero powerless. Without heroes to keep them in check, any criminal could use their quirk freely, with no one able to stop them." He held up a hand to halt the rising anxiety. "Fortunately, the source of the bullets has been removed from the 8 precepts' control, so it is highly unlikely that they have a completed version." Endeavor crossed his arms. "And what is this source?" Night Eye gestured to Midoriya. "Tell them what happened." Midoriya took a deep breath and stood. "Remember, this is for Eri, don't mess up. Several months ago, Irinaka Ochako and I encountered a young girl named Eri. She was running away from a man later identified as a member of the 8 precepts. We realized she was in danger and were forced to use our quirks to subdue the man." Night Eye nodded and waited for Midoriya to sit down. "The bullets were made from the girl's genetic material. Her quirk allows her to rewind time around a living thing. The 8 precepts modified that to target only the part of our DNA that controls quirk development. In essence, the bullets rewind our quirks to before they existed." Ingenium abruptly stood up. "What exactly did they do to this girl?" Night Eye glanced at the interns. This was their chance to leave, and they knew it, but they remained in their chairs. Night Eye went into the full, gory details about Chisaki's quirk, and how he harvested the genetic material from Eri. By the time he was done, even Ryukyu and Endeavor were unsettled, and several younger heroes looked ready to throw up. Chisaki Kai is dangerous, Night Eye went on, not just because of his quirk, but also his utter lack of empathy. No method of execution is too brutal, no torture too extreme. He will do anything if it means reaching his goal. If we are to stop him, we must be as thorough as he is evil. The detective stepped forward. We've been scouting out 8 Precepts bases for months in preparation for a raid like this. You'll all be divided into teams. Your first task will be to investigate each site for trigger manufacturing facilities, as well as anything that might be connected to the quirk erasing bullets. When the raid commences, those same teams will lead units from the police to take down each base simultaneously. Those not assigned surveillance duties will be part of the main assault on the 8 Precepts headquarters. Endeavor and Ryuku will be part of that group, though Night Eye will maintain command over hero operations for the duration of the raid. Rocklock scowled. If we know all this, why don't we just take them down today? Because we don't want some branch of the 8 Precepts to escape in the chaos, Endeavor said brusquely. This is our chance to completely destroy this organization, and it must be done right. What about the girl? Fat Gum asked. If she's so important to Chisaki, what steps are being taken to keep her out of his hands? Night Eye adjusted his glasses. Fortunately, Midoriya-san and Irinaka-san took care of that before we even realized the girl's importance. She is being cared for at UA and has round-the-clock security. Few outside this room know even that much, and fewer still know exactly where she is. And not even the 8 Precepts are crazy enough to try to break into UA, Ingenium added. Another reason we are not commencing the raid immediately is because of Chisaki's lieutenants. Night Eye pressed a button on his tablet, and a projector showed images of 10 masked men on the wall behind him. 2 were placed above the other 8, and a picture of Chisaki hovered over them. There are 2 top advisors for Chisaki, followed by the ones known as the 8 Expendables. All of them are merciless killers, and their quirks range from difficult to outright lethal. You will be provided with dossiers on all of them, in case they show up at different locations, though I suspect that they will be at the main base. The detective stood up again. I feel I must remind you that nothing said here is to be shared with anyone not connected to this case. If we don't keep a tight lid on this, the 8 Precepts could vanish before we get them, and then we're right back to square one. That got grim nods throughout the room. Even the newest heroes were aware of how these investigations went. We'll begin our preliminary operations tomorrow, Night Eye said. Head back to your agencies, gather whatever personnel and gear you may need, and be ready. Once the surveillance has been completed, you may be called in at any time. I don't like these guys, Shiro said later that night as the Rising Stars, plus Kirishima, studied the dossiers in Yaoyorozu's room. Which? Asui asked. All of them. Shiro pointed to a picture of a muscular man with wild hair. This guy, for example. First of all, I didn't even know underground quirk fights were a thing. And this guy killed over 30 people during these. Kendo Rappa, Midoriya muttered, not looking up from the dossier he was focused on. Quirk, strong shoulder. Lets him throw punches with superhuman strength and speed. Probably go for his legs, get him off balance, then knock him out with blows to the head. Stay away from his arms. Ochako, Mina or Tenya would do best against him. I'd also suggest Shoto, but he'd be needed for other fights. Ashido put Todoroki between her and her twin. He just gave out a decent battle plan while studying someone else. Is anyone else a little freaked out by that? You've known him longer than me, Todoroki said. I'm surprised you're not used to it. Hey, Izuku, who's the best matchup for Setsuno? Midoriya still didn't look up at the picture of a blonde-haired man in a mask. Setsuno Toya. Quirk, larceny. He can take anything his target has in their hands and draw them to his own. But it's limited to items that can be easily held in one hand. And he has to be able to see the item in question. The best people to go against him would be either Hanto or Shoto. I would also say Tsu, but his file says he's good with a sword, which makes using her tongue too much of a risk. If it comes to close quarters combat, Kirishima should take him. With pleasure, Kirishima said, and crashed his fists together. What about you? Yaoyorozu asked. Midoriya finally looked up and held out the Omnitrix. You might be able to take the watch out of me, even if I'm transformed. If that happens, I'm as good as dead. There was a pause as the others grimly took that in. Okay, we take down Setsuno first, right? Ashido tapped her chin. I wonder if I could get away with throwing acid in his eyes. Surprisingly, Ida didn't immediately reprimand her. Instead, he looked thoughtful. As long as you do not inflict permanent damage, it would be very easy to argue for that use of force. After all, he is a known killer while you are a first-year student. I am sure that other interns have done worse and still became full heroes. Speaking of killers, something has been bothering me. Yaoyorozu pointed at Rappa's file. We know these people are guilty of many crimes, so why haven't they been arrested before now? probably because they haven't done anything but be Chisaki's bodyguards since joining the 8 precepts, Midoriya said. And it's pointless to go after a few lieutenants if we can't take down the entire organization. Irinaka groaned. Great, it's like the Winter Soldier movie. Ashido gave her a look. Kind of, but not really. First of all, we don't have to deal with traitors. Good point. And there aren't giant airships that can kill millions of people in a day, Zero added. Okay, I get it. Midoriya bumped his shoulder against hers. And none of us are super soldiers or spies. Irinaka glared at him. I get it. Kirishima cackled. I know you guys like to have fun, but it's hilarious watching you up close. Thanks. Zero glanced at the other rising stars uncertainly, but only got shrugs in return. Unseen by all of them, Ida breathed a sigh of relief. He had been silently fretting that his friends were on the verge of completely losing it when it came to the 8 precepts. But seeing them laugh and joke like normal was a good sign. I hope the villains are as relaxed as we are, he thought. That way, they will not see us coming. Welcome to our headquarters, Chisaki said genially. I'm glad you all saw reason and decided to join us. Slice crossed her arms. We're here because our leader told us to. So long as the League benefits from this alliance, I see no reason to go against his orders. Chisaki shrugged. I can respect that. Still, I know we got off on the wrong foot, and I'm hoping we'll get past that. Toga glared at him. If by wrong foot, you mean killing Magni. Again, Chisaki shrugged. I suppose I should apologize for that. But he did attack me first. You mean she attacked you? A twice clone said. Yeah. The other clone pointed at Chisaki. She identified as a woman, so show some respect. You should be the ones showing respect, Irinaka Joy said from within the tiny puppet he used as a body. You're in our house, so be a little polite. Chisaki held up a hand, and the 8 precepts manager settled down. Like I said, let's move on. We just have a few questions for you. Another man, wearing a dark cloak, beak-shaped mask and wide-brimmed hat stepped forward. What is your quirk? My quirk is also the name I go by, Slice said, drawing surprised glances from her comrades. I use my hair to cut through almost any material, and I can fire individual strands, or even small tufts like bullets, though they lose penetrating power after a short distance. She blinked, and then clapped her hand over her mouth. What the hell did you just do? I couldn't stop myself from speaking. And your quirk? Nemoto Shin asked Toga. It's called Transform, she replied. I can turn into anyone, as long as I drink their blood. The more I drink, the longer I can stay in that form, and I can layer the transformations. It gets really uncomfortable if I do that, especially if I'm wearing clothes when I use my quirk, so I usually take them off first. She glared daggers at Nemoto. Do that again, and I'll cut your eyes out. If Nemoto was at all threatened, he didn't show it as he turned to one of the clones. What is your quirk? It's called Double, the clone said, while the other facepalmed. I can make a perfect copy of anything, as long as I know its exact dimensions and physical characteristics. I also have to know how it works, if it's not a living thing. For people, it's a bit easier, especially if I know them personally. I can make 2 copies at any one time, and I can't make more until one is destroyed. The first thing I make is less durable than the original, and if I make a second copy, it's even more fragile. Oh, and the clones can perfectly replicate their original's quirks, so I can make an army of myself in just a few minutes. The second clone stared at him. You are an idiot. We're the same person, so what does that make you? An idiot who didn't just explain his quirk at the drop of a hat. Shut up. You shut up. Both of you, stop, Slice ordered, and the 2 clones obeyed instantly. All right, Overhaul, you got the information you wanted. Anything else? Just one more question. Chisaki nodded at Nemoto, who addressed the entire team. Did Shigaraki order you to betray us? All I want you to do is get in their good graces, Shigaraki said, just after organizing the team. After that, do whatever you want to do, whenever you think is the best time. No, all 4 said at once. Chisaki nodded. Good enough for me. Welcome aboard. Slice regained her composure first. So, what do you need us to do? When the time is right, I'll need you for extra security. Chisaki stood up, as did his advisors and the expendables. Until then, stay inside. You're a bit too public for my taste, and we're not ready for that kind of exposure. Ugh, that's so lame. Toga whined. I don't suppose we could have something to read while we wait? Slice asked. One twice nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, like some manga, or some porn, the other added, then flinched when the rest of the team glared at him. What? I'm an adult. And you can't give me that look, we're the same person. Yeah, but I didn't say anything, did I? Chisaki rubbed the bridge of his nose. Irinaka, see to their arrangements. I have to get ready for the next stage. Of course, sir. Irinaka bowed, and then turned to the League members once his boss was gone. It's a good thing Nemoto here made you tell the truth. If the boss had suspected you even a little, you'd be dead. Remember that. The 8 precepts doesn't take kindly to disrespect or to betrayal. Good to know, Slice said and leaned over the tiny puppet. Just so we're clear, the League also looks down on traitors. We take loyalty to our own very seriously, and only the orders of Shigaraki kept us from declaring war on you all. Oh, and one other thing. Irinaka felt something tap his puppet's shoulder and saw that a tendril of Slice's hair had snuck around him. I don't like disgusting little maggots speaking to me as if they're my superior. Remember that when you start to act tough. The next 2 days were some of the longest of Midoriya's life. When he wasn't preparing for the raid on the 8 precepts, he was doing homework. The stress made it difficult to sleep, so he spent long hours exercising. It was the same for his friends, who sent texts or emails to their mentors twice a day, asking for updates. While there wasn't much to say about the main Yakuza base, the reports on the secondary locations were somewhat reassuring. There were no signs of the chemicals needed for trigger production, nor the 8 precepts leadership. Every hour, more and more locations were crossed off the list. It was all but certain that the main base was going to be the primary target. But Night Eye was nothing if not thorough. The only thing that really worried Midoriya was that the heroes might think that the raid was too dangerous for interns and bench them right before things happened. That was unthinkable to Midoriya. If he couldn't take down Chisaki himself, he wanted to be there to watch it happen. Finally, at almost 2 in the morning, he was woken up by an alarm on his phone. It was a simple message from Night Eye. Come to the agency. We are moving in soon. Midoriya was out of bed, dressed and at the bottom of the stairs faster than he'd ever moved in his life. He nearly crashed into Uriraka, who was anxiously rubbing her metal arm. You ready? Midoriya asked. Uriraka nodded and took his hand. Ready. By the time the interns got to Night Eye's agency, the entire complement of heroes was present. The students briefly stayed together until they realized that it was probably a better idea to stay with their mentors. A wise precaution to get into your costume, Night Eye said. Heroes should always be prepared in advance whenever possible. Midoriya tugged at his sleeve self-consciously. Tagada had been the one to tell the rising stars to get into costume, so he deserved the credit. The detective from the briefing stepped before the crowd. Attention, heroes. As of now, we have confirmed that the 8 precepts main headquarters does indeed house their entire leadership. I was told that I would have the search warrant in my hand in 2 hours, so that's how long you have to get ready. If there is anyone you need to speak to before then, now is the time. Midoriya turned to his mentor. What is he talking about? Isn't everyone here? Night Eye adjusted his glasses. In situations like these, it helps some heroes to speak to loved ones, just in case. Just in case the worst should happen. Midoriya paled. I see. Sir, can I make a phone call? He got a brief nod, and even a look of understanding. Make it quick, in case the warrant arrives early, and do not speak of any details of the operation. Yes, sir. Midoriya headed for a quiet corner of the room. Along the way, he noticed most of his friends had already pulled out their phones. His mother answered his call after only 2 rings. Izuku, is everything okay? It's very early, and we spoke yesterday. And fine, Mom, Izuku promised. Sir, Night Eye just has me about to do some hero work that I've never done before, and I'm a little nervous. He said it was a good idea to call family before an operation, if it helps. Well, that was nice of him to let you do that, Inko said brightly. And don't worry about being nervous. You're new at being a hero, but I know what you're capable of. Just remember what you've learned at school, and listen to your mentor. Right? Thanks, Mom. Izuku, I just want to let you know how proud I am of the man you're becoming. And I know that Ben would be just as proud. Izuku took off his visor to wipe his stinging eyes. Thanks. So, whatever it is you're going to do today, just remember that I believe in you, so does your father, and all your friends, so you should believe in yourself. I will, Mom. Izuku smiled. Some of the anger that had been building up all week had been replaced with a calm confidence. I think I needed to hear that. It's the secret second quirk most mothers have, giving good advice to our children. Inko laughed. Okay, honey, I'm going to work soon, but is there anything else you need? No, I'm okay. Izuku glanced at Night Eye, who quickly tapped his watch. I need to go too. Love you, Mom. I love you too, Izuku. Deku hung up and put his visor back on, just as Night Eye and Endeavor approached. Endeavor made a suggestion. Night Eye said, one that I am inclined to accept. Your quirk makes you uniquely suited to almost any situation, Endeavor said without preamble. And, as the mission today could change rapidly, I want you and the other interns to act as a quick reaction force. You will be granted some autonomy during the operation, though only when I or Sir Night Eye say so. Deku nodded, even as Night Eye had more to add. Lemillion and Nezu have both informed me of your tactical abilities. As such, you will be in command of this squad. Deku blinked. Me. Really? Night Eye looked uncomfortable for a moment. I would have preferred Lemillion be in charge, but he insisted that it was difficult enough focusing on his own abilities, much less commanding others. Your team will likely only be dealing with cleanup, but it would be irresponsible of me not to at least inform you of the possibilities. Deku was still processing that when the older heroes walked away, and he jumped when Lemillion and Nejire-chan each hugged one of his arms. Team leader, huh? Lemillion grinned. You know, heroes only give leadership roles to their sidekicks when they're ready to open up their own agencies. Nejire-chan gasped. No way. Does that mean Izukun's gonna have an agency before he even graduates? That's so cool. While his friends teased Deku, Sun Eater rolled his eyes. Well, at least they're keeping him from being too upset. Red Riot glanced his way. I know it's been bad for the last few days, but I thought he was handling it. Sun Eater shrugged. They get upset when he's upset. Aw, I get it. Red Riot nodded sagely. Now we just need to take down the bad guys, and everything will be okay. Somehow, I doubt it'll be that easy. Ishigami-san, it's so nice to finally meet you, Nezu said as he waved his guest inside. Detective Ishigami was solidly built for a man his age, with only a few wrinkles and gray hairs. Few people would have guessed that he was over 60 years old, yet still active in the police force. Likewise, Nezu-san, Ishigami said in a voice that was unusually soft for a man who looked like a hard-boiled detective. Honestly, with your track record, I'm annoyed that the force doesn't ask for your help solving crimes more often. They did, once, Nezu said, and led the man to the teacher's lounge. I ended up doing their job a little too well, so I'm only asked to consult when the police have no other options. Ishigami winced. Yeah, some cops don't like it when heroes get the job done better than they can. Not you. No, heroes made it so that I lived long enough to actually have grandkids. Ishigami shrugged. Speaking of children, I was hoping I could speak to the girl. Iri, was it? Yes, though I do want to confirm something. Nezu paused at the door. You only want to ask some general questions today. Of course, I want her to get used to me before I bring up past trauma during my questioning. Ishigami smiled kindly. I don't know what kind of information she has on the 8 precepts, or even if she has anything at all. But every little bit helps to build a better case to lock him up forever. She doesn't need to appear in court. Ishigami shook his head. Not if I have anything to say about it. That's good to hear. Iri-chan barely tolerates 1 or 2 strangers at a time, much less a full courtroom. Nezu slid open the door. Hello, Iri-chan. And thank you for watching her, All Might. Ishigami poked his head into the room before he could stop himself. All Might. Wow, I never thought I'd get to meet you today. All Might put down his coffee and rose. He still wore an oversized suit, a habit he had yet to break. You're the detective Nezu was bringing in, right? Always a pleasure to meet the police. Unless we're issuing parking tickets, right? Ishigami grinned. We get complaints from hero agencies about tickets all the time. Some of them think we do it out of spite. Wait, you don't. All Might laughed at his own joke, then grabbed a tissue to wipe away a dribble of blood. Iri-chan, this man is here to speak to you. Is that okay? Iri, who had been drawing up until a few minutes earlier, now cautiously poked her head out from behind All Might's legs. Okay. Ishigami smiled and waited for All Might to move before kneeling in front of the girl, and held out his hand. Hello, young lady. It all happened an instant too fast for the heroes to react in time. They saw the empty needle slide out from Ishigami's sleeve and fall to the floor, just as he touched Iri's hand. There was a flash of red light, and Iri was replaced by a stack of wooden planks. By the time Eraserhead and Hound Dog, who had been watching the campus security feeds, got to the lounge, All Might had transformed and pinned Ishigami to the wall with one meaty fist. What did you do? All Might roared. Where is Iri? Nezu was staring at the pile of wood. I read his file. His quirk is called Blood Mark. It allows him to swap something he's touching with anything he's left his blood on. Normally, he has to be able to see both objects at once, and it doesn't work on living things. But with Trigger, Eraserhead activated his own quirk, catching All Might in his gaze and forcing him back into his skinny form. Eraserhead pushed the retired hero out of the way and grabbed Ishigami. He won't be using that to escape now. Eraserhead tightened his grip. Explain yourself. I fulfilled my objective, Ishigami said, his voice tired and sad. I surrender. There's only one reason he'd go after Iri-chan. Nezu realized. He's working for the Yakuza. All Might, call Night Eye immediately. All Might grabbed his phone and hurriedly dialed his former sidekick. This was no longer just a raid. It was now a rescue mission. The 8 Precepts base looked like an old manor, albeit one that had been properly maintained. There was a wall only slightly taller than a tall man, surrounding a garden that led to the main house. It hid its true nature well by appearing as normal as possible. Even if Deku hadn't been aware of the circumstances, he wouldn't have trusted it. His obsession with quirks and his experiences with the Omnitrix had taught him not to take things at face value. I wonder if these guys know we're here, Uravity whispered by Deku's side. Highly likely, Endeavor grunted. His sudden appearance made both of them jump and barely stifle a yelp. This isn't a nighttime raid. They would have to be blind not to see us coming, but they might be overconfident. They've remained out of the spotlight for a long time. The heroes and police waited just across the street from the compound. For every hero or sidekick, there were 2 officers, all equipped with riot gear and assault rifles. Deku couldn't remember the last time there was such a heavy response to a criminal organization, certainly not in his lifetime. The balding detective stepped forward. I'm going to read the warrant, and then we will engage with full force. Remember the plan. The heroes will punch through whatever resistance the 8 precepts muster, while the police will cover the flanks. Deku nodded. Even though he wasn't being directly addressed, he had to remember that he was only a cog in the machine today. As the detective marched to the gate, covered by officers and a pair of heroes, Night Eye's phone rang. Deku looked at him curiously. During operations like these, it was standard procedure to keep any phones off, or at least silent. That is my emergency ringtone, Night Eye said with a frown. Only 5 people know that number, and they know not to use it unless it is an actual emergency. Deku shared a worried glance with his team. All of them had a bad feeling about this, but none of them could quite figure out what it was. The only consolation they had was that Night Eye came back after only a few minutes, so they didn't have to wait for long. However, Night Eye looked as grim as anyone had ever seen. Detective, Night Eye managed to grab the policeman before he reached the gate to the compound. We have a situation. The detective scowled. Don't tell me one of the teams at another safe house spotted our targets. Worse, Night Eye said, and made sure the other officers and heroes could hear him. A double agent infiltrated UA and kidnapped the girl the 8 precepts need for their project. In that moment, the entire world came to screeching halt for the interns. Somehow, the Yakuza had kidnapped Iri. They have her. Uravity grabbed Deku's hand hard enough to hurt, but he didn't even notice. Izuku, they have our little girl. Deku glared at the walls of the compound with such hatred that he almost transformed into a big then and there. We need to go in, Night Eye said calmly. The 8 precepts have had her for less than 5 minutes. They can't have set up proper defenses yet, nor could they have even started on the final version of their quirk erasing bullets. If we storm the compound, we can rescue her. Endeavor nodded. Retrieving the girl is now the primary objective, followed by containment of the enemy. He paused, then glanced at the interns. I believe that we should allow the students to attempt the rescue. They have tunnel vision, and will be useless in the battle against the rest of the 8 precepts forces. Besides, I doubt we could stop them at this point. Agreed. Night Eye hesitated, then grabbed Lemillion by the shoulder. Mirio, look at me. Sir. Lemillion barely had time to blink before Night Eye used his quirk on him. Sir, you said you wouldn't. This is a rapidly changing situation, and I need as much information as possible. Night Eye nodded to himself. We will open a path for you. Smash a hole through the first bookcase you see, and then follow the tunnel. Just be careful, and watch out for the ambush when you first get inside. Lemillion blinked, then tapped Deku on the shoulder. Let's go, guys, we need to get our girl back. Rather than answer, Deku turned into wrath, but instead of roaring bluster, he only let out a low, menacing growl. Night Eye turned to the detective. You have the warrant, but we no longer have time. Allow us to punch through, and then follow after us. The other man nodded. Understood. We will be right behind you. With a curt gesture from Night Eye, Ryukyu transformed into her massive dragon form, and Endeavor created a ball of fire in his hands. The latter hurled the fire at the gate and blasted it apart, and the former charged before the debris finished raining down. Inside the courtyard, dozens of Yakuza soldiers staggered to their feet and tried to fight back. Some of them had weapons, while others used their quirks, but none of them were prepared for a rampaging dragon in their midst. In any other situation, even the big 3 would have been content to let the pro heroes do the work. It wasn't every day you got to see so many heroes fight in one place, after all. However, the interns hardly cared at all. The only thing that mattered was a sweet little girl who had to be scared out of her mind. Wrath, Red Riot and Lemillion led the charge, barreling through any thug unlucky enough to get in their way. Uravity, Nejire-chan and Sun Eater flew overhead, while Triumph carried everyone else in a moving cradle of ice. Even the cheerful Nejire-chan barely waved at Ryukyu as she swept aside the soldiers in front of the main house. Then Wrath punched the reinforced doors down, and they were inside. Slice felt a tremor above them and glanced up. When the shaking didn't get worse, she returned her attention to her book. Do you think it'll take them long to get down here? She asked idly. Probably not, a Twice said. I mean, I did leave some clones up there to slow them down. But those are heroes coming to rescue a little girl. Yep, Toga agreed. Those guys are in full righteous badass mode. I give these Yakuza an hour at most. Slice nodded and was quiet for a moment. Hey, Himiko, Jin, you want to mess up these Yakuza pigs? Hell yeah, one Twice shouted. The other clone rubbed his hands together in glee. This is gonna be a bloodbath. Absolutely. Toga already had a knife out, but then her disposable phone rang. Huh? Must be Shigaraki. He said he'd call in an emergency. The other villains waited as Toga took the call. They couldn't hear Shigaraki, but they were intrigued as Toga seemed to agree with every sentence. Well, a Twice asked impatiently. What did he say? Toga's smile promised pain in someone's immediate future. Turns out that Shigaraki needs something before we go. Can I have a few clones of me, please? Lemillion liked working with other heroes, and not just because he believed that they should be working together, not competing. The best part was using himself as a decoy, seeing the confusion on his opponent's face as their attacks passed harmlessly through him, and then watching as another hero took them down. That happened a lot over the course of the next few seconds, as 15 clones of Twice charged, each swinging bladed measuring tapes. Lemillion just laughed as they did absolutely nothing. He didn't really feel like laughing, but he knew that it usually unsettled and frustrated his enemies. A moment later, every single one of the clones was either vaporized by Triumph's fire, or melted by Alien Queen's acid. Follow me, Lemillion shouted. I know where we need to go. Wrath heard. Wrath charged straight through Lemillion. Wrath is punching his way through. Wrath did just that, obliterating the entrance to the hidden passage, and inflicting serious injury to the small team of Yakuza thugs waiting for them. None of the team stopped to even look at them, though some of them did get worried when they found a wall blocking their path. I think they've got a serious lead on us, Lemillion said as they ran. I'm going on ahead to try and slow them down. Deku, you should go with him, Triumph said. We'll break through the walls and catch up when we can. Lemillion pushed one for all to 30%, and then used permeation to pass through the walls at blistering speed. As hyper-focused as he was, Deku still hesitated as he turned into Big Chill. Are you sure? He asked. Uravity nodded, answering for all of them. Just get her back, Izuku. Get her back. Big Chill nodded back, and then flew after Lemillion. Well, that's them gone, Cellophane said. Hey, Red Riot, mind making a door for us? Red Riot grinned wildly. Coming through. Eri, you've been very bad. Chisaki leaned forward menacingly. Do you know how much you've inconvenienced me? For her part, Eri flattened herself against the wall and tried to disappear. This was her nightmare, one she'd started to hope would never be real again. She had started to think that maybe she could spend the rest of her life with Izuku, Ochako, and the rest of her new family. But she saw the malice in Overhaul's eyes and knew the pain that would follow. Hey, Overhaul. Eri jumped when a Twice clone bounded over. I got good news and bad news. The bad news is that the heroes are tearing apart your little army, and they've already entered the tunnels. Chrono tensed at Chisaki's side. And what's the good news? Twice put his fists on his hips. I've got a bunch of me running around to slow him down. As soon as we get to the extraction zone, I can make a Kurogiri clone to get us all out of here. Chisaki blinked. Why can't you just make a clone and get us out now? Twice sighed. Because his quirk is stupid, okay. It only works if he knows exactly where he's going to send a warp gate, and it's hard for him to orient himself inside a place he's never been to. It's easier if we're outside. He does boring stuff, like look at the position of the sun. Is that true? Nemoto asked. Oh, sure. Twice shrugged. That's what he told me, anyway. Fine, we'll keep going. Chisaki thought about it for a moment, then grabbed Eri and thrust her into Twice's hands. We'll need you intact to make a clone, so you'll hold her and stay with me. Twice carefully balanced Eri in the crook of one arm, and then saluted with the other. You got it, boss man. I'm great with kids. Somehow, I doubt it. Chisaki motioned for Twice to get a move on. Hurry up. Don't worry, Twice whispered, so quietly that only Eri could hear him. I'm gonna keep you safe, just because it'll really make that jerk mad. Eri had been terrified. Now, she was terrified and very confused. Hi, you must be Lemillion. Toga waved as she did her best to keep up with the hero in training. I'm Toga Himiko, nice to meet you. Oh, and don't bother trying to capture me, I'm just a clone. Thanks for letting me know, Lemillion said absently. What are you doing here? Just pointing you in the right direction, Toga said cheerily. See, the League really hates the Yakuza, so Shigaraki asked us to infiltrate them and sabotage whatever their plans were. Well, actually, he never gave us orders, but that's what we decided to do. So you're helping us. Hey, more like we have the same enemy, not the same thing. Toga pointed to a fork in the path. Take the left tunnel, the right is a dead end. How can I trust you? Toga giggled. I guess you can't, but this is one of those split-second decisions, right? Anyway, you should hurry. Twice can't keep that adorable little girl safe for long. Her eyes widened when she saw Big Chill round the corner. Oh, is that Izuku? Hi, Izuku. The real me is looking forward to cutting you up again. The reminder that Toga had stabbed Deku several times was enough to make Lemillion whirl, just so he could have the satisfaction of punching the psychopath. But the clone whipped out a knife and slit her own throat in one quick motion. All Big Chill saw was the clone dissolve into a puddle of brown goo. What was that about? Big Chill called out. Nothing, Lemillion said. I'm going on ahead, take the left path. With that, he upped one for all to 40% and rocketed forward. He wasn't someone who typically vented his frustrations through violence, but between the 8 precepts and the League of Villains, he really wanted to punch something. Do you guys think it's too quiet? Alien Queen asked. We're in their headquarters, so I thought there'd be more fighting down here. They probably sent their soldiers outside to stop the attack, Genesis said. It's unlikely that they had time to lay traps. Sun Eater bit his lip. Still, with Twice around, there should be an army of clones to stop us. I'm not complaining, Cellophane half joked. This just means that we'll be fresh for the real fight. Speaking of fighting, Triumph brought his hand to his earpiece. Endeavor, do you read? I hear you, Triumph, his father said a moment later. What's your status? In pursuit of the enemy and the hostage, Triumph reported. We've had almost no resistance so far. Lemillion and Deku went ahead, but we're less than 2 minutes behind them. Understood. We've almost finished up here, so teams will be entering the lower levels to assist you soon. And Shoto, Triumph raised an eyebrow at Endeavor's use of his real name. Yeah, be careful. Thanks. Triumph ended the call and shook his head. Weird. He actually sounded concerned. Alien Queen lightly slapped his shoulder. Savory first, work on your issues later. Right? At least Triumph could physically attack the people who had taken Eri, so that would make him feel better. We're almost there, Kirono announced. We just need to get through the next room, and we'll reach the exit. You heard him, Chisaki said to Twice. Make the clone and get it ready. Sure thing. As enthusiastic as the Twice sounded, he was starting to sweat. He had hoped that the heroes would catch up by now, since he had lied about creating an army to slow them down. Now, he would either have to stall or outright attack the Yakuza, and for all that he was a villain, he had no intention of exposing a child to that kind of crossfire. Hold it, Twice almost laughed in relief. There, panting heavily but standing tall and surrounded by golden light, was Lemillion. He had just phased through the wall overhaul had left to slow down any pursuers. Of course, that meant absolutely nothing to Lemillion, but he might still have a problem with the room full of opponents. Kirono and Irinaka were tough, and the 8 expendables were nothing to scoff at. Then there was Chisaki himself. Shigaraki had made it clear that the 8 precepts leader was, as he put it, boss material. You guys really made it hard to get here in time, Lemillion said as he took deep, steadying breaths. I haven't had to push myself like that in a long while. Chisaki scoffed. Just one kid. How pathetic. Lemillion grinned. Oh, I won't be alone for long. The real question is, how many of you will I take down before my backup arrives? I'm thinking I'll get at least 3 of you. Arrogant little corpse, isn't he? Rappa bashed his fists together and stomped forward. Let me take him, overhaul. Chisaki was already heading for the exit. Just make it fast, raw. Lemillion was already moving. And though Rappa tried to intercept him, he phased through the big man to drive his fist into Chisaki's face. A blink of an eye later, and he destroyed the Twice clone, caught Eri in one arm, and darted back. I'll be taking Eri back now, he said calmly. Give up now, and maybe you'll get to say goodbye before you're hauled off forever. Despite his confident exterior, Lemillion was worried. Had Eri not been in the room, he would have easily picked off each Yakuza by slipping in and out of the walls and floor. As it was, he would have to fight with one eye on the girl, keeping her safe until the others showed up. He estimated that he needed at least 2 minutes. Fine, he thought, I won't give them a chance to even think about Eri. I'll make myself the biggest threat in the room. He dashed back as far as he could, and then placed Eri on the floor. Stay right here, okay. Deku and the others will be here very soon. Don't. Eri gasped out. Chisaki, he'll kill you. Lemillion gave her his best smile. He has to touch me to do that, and I won't let him. With that, he stepped away and cracked his knuckles. Okay, let's do this. Before, his golden aura had merely crackled. Now, it was like One for All had manifested in a storm around him. The sheer force of it cracked the floor around him and sent most of the Yakuza staggering to the floor. One for All 60%. Using One for All at even 30% for several minutes straight was hard, but doable. He could even manage 40% for short bursts without hurting himself. He had never even tried to reach 60% before. He just hoped he didn't shatter his skeleton with this move. Rappa threw 100 punches in the span of 2 seconds. In Lemillion's eyes, it was like Rappa was moving in slow motion. He could have dodged the attacks, even without permeation. As it was, he sank into the floor and popped out behind Rappa before the man even registered that Lemillion was gone. He was smashed into the ground with a quick chop. Nemoto drew a pistol, but Lemillion reached out and used Black Whip to snatch the weapon out of his hand. He also happened to break the man's wrist at the same time. Focused as he was on the fight, Lemillion was only dimly aware that he had yet to thank Melissa. She had built small nozzles into his gloves that let him use his newest quirk without shredding his sleeves. He started to charge towards Setsuno, but a wave of dizziness overcame him, followed by horrible pain as his muscles started to tear apart. He fell to his knees, and his vision blurred. He almost missed Sakaki Deidoro and Setsuno approaching. The former had knives in his hands, while the latter had his katana. Sakaki's quirk, sloshed, made his targets feel drunk, and it got worse the more alcohol he drank. Lemillion tried to summon Black Whip, but Setsuno drove his sword into his arm. Fortunately, Lemillion used permeation to avoid getting stabbed, but it took all his concentration just to do that. That was impressive, Chisaki said as he got up. If you weren't bound by your laws, you could have killed me with that punch. Chisaki looked terrible. Blood dripped down his face, and one eye was swollen shut. That all changed when he took off one glove and put his hand to his face. For a moment, it looked like his face exploded, and when it came back together, it was like he'd never been hit at all. I thought I'd knocked him out, Lemillion thought bitterly. Now he can undo any damage I did to his goons. Kirono, target the girl, Chisaki ordered, not taking his eyes off Lemillion. If you move, hero, or try to avoid my hand, she will suffer. You don't want that, do you? Lemillion gritted his teeth. You're a monster, Chisaki. I'm no monster, Chisaki said, kneeling down so that he was level with the young man. I'm just using the curse of quirks to make a cure for this disease. Really, you should be thanking me for restoring the natural order of things. He then narrowed his eyes. And don't use my name so casually. I am Overhaul. Every instinct Lemillion had screamed at him to move, to use permeation, to not get touched. But he knew that Chisaki would follow through on his threat to hurt Iri. Think, Mirio, think. Lemillion refused to let fear show as Chisaki's hand came closer. Izuku, I could really use some help here. Ingenium punched the Yakuza soldier in the face, breaking his nose and knocking him out. How many? A kick, and then another man fell with a cracked knee. Guys, a third man collapsed from a swift blow to the temple. Do the 8 precepts have? I received a report from the other teams, Sir Night-Eye said calmly as he dodged a wild slash from a knife. The locations they hit were curiously understaffed. It seems that Chisaki may have planned a mass relocation. Sky Dancer flipped overhead, kicked another thug in the face, and gracefully landed in midair. Or he thought stealing a kid right out of UA was a big enough risk to get all the extra security. That is a possibility, Night-Eye admitted. Still, we should have this mess cleaned up in a few more minutes, and then we can go after the interns. Good. Endeavor grunted as he melted an iron pole before it connected with his face. I've read the details about Overhaul, and I don't like the idea of my son getting anywhere near him. It's nice to see you care about all the kids, including the hostage, Ingenium said, his sarcasm so thick it was almost visible. Endeavor wasn't the only one with family headed right into danger, but at least he cared about more than one person. Concentrate, all of you, Ryukyu growled as she flattened an entire squad of Yakuza, then bowled over 3 more with her tail. The sooner we're done here, the sooner we can go after the kids. Everyone, hero, police and Yakuza alike, were nearly knocked over by a sudden tremor. Nearby, the manor walls began to crack and tilt. Oh, that can't be good, Fat Gum said. What's going on down there? Things happen very fast. As soon as Big Chill passed through the wall, he had only a few seconds to process and act. There he wasn't in the line of fire, which was good. Lemillion was inches away from Chisaki's hand, which was bad. It would take Deku less than half a second to transform from one alien to another. Don't just analyze, don't just react. There was a flash of green light, and then a thin blade of diamond sliced Overhaul's hand off at the wrist. By the time Chisaki had screamed and staggered back to repair it with overhaul, Diamond had landed on the ground and put himself between Lemillion and certain death. Had Chisaki been anyone else, Deku might have held back a little, even knowing what he had done to Eri. Deep down, he doubted he would have committed such brutality. However, Chisaki's quirk meant that, as long as he had one hand left and a brain to decide what to do, he was almost immortal. Lemillion. Diamond had then turned into NRG. Take Eri and go the way we came. Don't stop, just run. I'll hold them off. Deku, you can't take them alone. Despite his words, Lemillion staggered to his feet and picked up Eri. NRG shifted slightly and blew a hole through the wall Chisaki had created, then turned back to the 8 expendables and fired a beam of radiation at their feet. Mirio, go. Lemillion grimaced, but even with his own reservations and Eri struggling in his arms, he turned and ran. It killed him to admit it, but Deku was right. He had pushed himself far beyond what his body was capable of, and then tried to pick a fight with 10 extremely dangerous people, all while handicapping himself by protecting Eri. If he tried to fight now, he would just get in the way. By getting Eri out, he was removing any reason for Deku to hold back. Okay, he bit out, good luck. Eri reached out for Deku. Izu, no. She wasn't the only one to reach out. An already healed Chisaki, seeing his prize literally snatched away, put his hand on the floor. You're not taking her away. Lemillion might not have been in any shape to fight, but he could still run. He used 10% of one for all to leap forward. Slipping through the hole Deku had made an instant before Chisaki closed it again. Good luck, Izuku. Uravity was so focused on catching up to where she thought Eri was, she almost missed the girl in Lemillion's arms. She skidded to a halt, spun around, and nearly tackled Lemillion in her attempt to hug Eri. Eri-chan, are you okay? Are you hurt? Eri was trembling in her arms, and tears ran down her face. Izu is back there. Chisaki will kill him. Uravity gestured for the others to go on ahead, while she and Lemillion stayed behind. Oh, sweetie, Izuku is going to be okay. We're all going to go help him, and then we're going to go back to UA together. I promise. Irinaka had no experience in parenting, but she drew on every memory she had of her own mother comforting her after a nightmare, and her recent experience as Eri's guardian. She poured every ounce of confidence into making it seem like the best possible outcome was the only possible outcome. I have to go help Izuku, okay. Uravity removed her helmet long enough to put a gentle kiss on Eri's forehead. We'll be back soon, so stay with Uncle Mirio. He'll take you outside where it's safe. Eri gripped Uravity's hand tightly. The fear on her face, so out of place on a child so young, broke Uravity's heart. Okay. Uravity put her helmet back on and looked at Lemillion. Get her out of here. I will. Lemillion held Eri close with one arm and pointed back the way he'd come with the other. You'd better hurry, or there won't be anything left for you to beat up. I'm sure Izuku saved me one. Uravity used her quirk on herself and activated her wings. He's considerate like that. You are, by far, the dumbest hero I've ever met, Chisaki said. You should have run with your friend. Now, it's just you against us. We'd still chase you down and kill you, but you'd live at least a few more seconds. NRG brought his fists together with a clang. Every second I slow you down gets Eri just a little further away from you. Besides, I won't be alone for long. Kirono leaned closer to Chisaki. Sir, if other heroes are coming, maybe we should pull back. No. Chisaki flexed his fingers. Eri is the key to all of this. We kill these heroes, catch up to Eri, and get her back. Then we can rebuild. Rappa, rip open that can. Rappa cracked his knuckles. You got it. Before he took 3 steps, NRG transformed, and was replaced by what looked like a green sea turtle that had learned to stand upright. The Omnitrix dial sat in the center of his front shell, which had odd holes. Terraspin tucked his head into his shell, then spread his arm flippers. His legs came together, almost merging, and he started to hover. The flippers spun like the propellers of a fan, and air blasted out of the holes in his torso. The strong wind blew Rappa back like a cannonball, and would have crashed into Chisaki, but Tengai Hekeji, a man with short blonde hair and a mask similar to Chisaki's, activated his quirk, and a dome of translucent yellow energy surrounded him and the rest of the Yakuza. Rappa, get up, Chisaki ordered, and then turned to Terraspin. That's your big plan. Knock us over with wind. Try again, kid. Chisaki pressed his hand to the floor, and spikes sprouted up underneath Terraspin. They would have impaled him, but he leaned forward, still spinning, and began to fly. Kill him, Chisaki shouted. Terraspin was near the high ceiling, and with none of the Yakuza possessing effective long-range quirks, they resorted to more mundane methods. Several of them drew pistols and fired, but the bullets merely bounced off Terraspin's shell, or were deflected by his high-speed flippers. For his part, Terraspin was annoyed. He hadn't used this alien in a real fight before, and had hoped that it would surprise the Yakuza. Instead, all he'd done was give Rappa a few bruises, while the rest were saved by Tengi's barrier. Fine, I'm done playing around. Time to go plus ultimate. Terraspin was momentarily hidden by another flash of green light. When it faded, the 8 precepts got a good look at ultimate Terraspin. He wasn't any bigger than before, but his shell was completely exposed. Every plate was gone, leaving little more than a collection of thick sticks stuck together. Instead of flesh, the interior of his shell was made of twisting wind. The visible core, the center of his shell, was a sphere of black wind that pulsed like a heartbeat. Similar black spheres replaced his arms and legs, as was his head was another black wind sphere. The only difference was a pair of crackling green lines, similar to eyes, which hovered just in front of the top sphere. Last chance, he said, with the voice of wind passing through a pile of dead leaves. Surrender now, or you will get hurt. Chisaki scoffed. You think you're impressive, kid? There are 11 of us and 1 of you. Ultimate Terraspin would have smiled if he still had a mouth. Count again in a couple of minutes. You'll be dead by then. Chisaki pointed at him. Kill him. Chisaki hurled a pair of knives, but one of the wind spheres expanded into a full-blown tornado. The wind not only knocked away the blades, but hurled Chisaki into the far wall. Ultimate Terraspin wasn't done, and knocked down Rappa and the giant brute that was Katsuki Rikia. The rest dove for cover or hid behind Tengi's barrier once again. Chisaki placed his hand on the ground and made a wave of spikes erupt underneath Ultimate Terraspin, but he easily flew out of the way. Ultimate Terraspin's 4 limbs turned into enormous tornadoes and lashed out like they each had a mind of their own. Wherever the wind connected with the concrete, it carved a deep furrow, and had it directly connected with anyone without superhuman durability, it would have critically injured them at the very least. The problem, one that Deku had had since first using Ultimate Terraspin, was that he was all power, and almost no control. It was all he could do just to point his wind in the right direction. Had he been fighting anyone else, he wouldn't have even considered using Ultimate Terraspin. But this was Chisaki. There was more than enough hatred for that man to loosen his self-control. He also didn't need to worry as much anyway. Tengi kept putting up barriers to keep his comrades alive, though the sheer power of the windstorms knocked them around inside the domes. This is getting annoying, Ultimate Terraspin thought. I need to catch them, not kill them. What else can I turn into that can fight all of them at once? Fortunately, he didn't have to come up with a solution, because the wall behind him shattered once again, and he was joined by the other rising stars, 2 of the big 3, and Kirishima. Deku, are you alright? Genesis asked as she created a taser in one hand, and a shield on the opposite arm. I'm fine, he replied, even as he turned back into Terraspin. And then Diamond Head. Ultimate Terraspin was simply too dangerous to use in an enclosed space when there were allies close. What about Iri? Had the situation been less serious, Uravity would have given him a supportive smile. As it was, she kept her eyes on the enemy. Lemillion is bringing her to the surface, and the other heroes are on the way to meet them. These guys won't touch her again. You think you can stop us? Overhaul's voice was calm, but the heroes could see one of his eyes twitching. I won't let a bunch of children who don't understand how the world should be get in my way. Kill them all. Deku, take Overhaul, Sun Eater said, his arms already morphing into huge tentacles. We'll keep the rest of them off you. Thanks. Diamond Head charged, but almost tripped over Irinaka's puppet body. You won't go near Overhaul. The tiny puppet shrieked, and a muscular arm tore free from the inside out, clutching a needle. Watch out, Triumph shouted. They've got Trigger. No one was fast enough to stop Irinaka from injecting himself. After that, all hell broke loose. Before the first tremor had faded, the heroes had already stormed the building. They had no idea what kind of condition their interns were in, and each of them wanted to kick themselves for letting students charge into a potential battle with hardened criminals. They all knew that they would have disobeyed orders to rescue Eri, and giving them an objective gave them at least a little control over the teens. But that just made it the best of a list of bad decisions. Turn right at the bookcase, Night Eye said as they ran. Lemillion should rendezvous with us in less than 2 minutes. He will have the girl. Understood, Endeavor grunted. Night Eye, you and Ryukyu will escort them outside. Ryukyu wanted to protest. After all, she had 4 interns down there, and thus had the most to lose, but she knew Endeavor was right. Her quirk made fighting in close quarters a challenge at the best of times, made even harder with allies nearby. The hero's path was delayed by the appearance of several Twice clones, and 2 clones of Slice. Ever since learning of Twice's quirk, the entire hero community had a destroy on-site order for the clones, to keep them from creating an army in minutes. Endeavor immediately roasted the Twices with a burst of flame, several of whom were in the middle of making more clones. The Slices used the melting clones as shields, then used their hair as spears, heading right for Endeavor. Fat Gum jumped in the way of the attack, and though the hardened hair dug into his body, it didn't actually hurt him. He then wrapped his arms around the hair, holding them fast. "Anytime, guys," he shouted. Ingenium dashed around him, charging straight for the clones. Both his arms were pulled back, and the engines sticking from his elbows began to hum menacingly. Double recipro thrust. With a burst of power, both arms drove their respective fists into the stomachs of the clones. Both of them burst goo and melted around Ingenium's hands. "Oh, that's gross," he complained as he shook the mess off. "I hope this doesn't stain my gloves." Sky Dancer rolled her eyes and was about to make a snappy comment, but then she saw who was running towards them. "Hey, Lemillion, you've got the girl." Lemillion gasped for air as he gently put Eri on the ground. "I'm okay, phew. I pushed myself way too hard today." "Where are the others?" Endeavor demanded. "Any injuries to report?" Lemillion took one more breath, then stood up straight and began his report. "When I left, Deku was holding off Chisaki and the 8 Precepts' leadership. The rest of the team should be reinforcing him now." Ingenium did some quick math in his head. "It'll take us at least 5 minutes to reach them, assuming we aren't delayed." "Can they hold out for that long?" "We have to trust that they can," Sky Dancer said grimly. No one voiced the alternative. It was too terrible to consider. "We must hurry," Endeavor said. "Ruku, Night Eye, take Lemillion and the girl outside. Then take command of the situation out there. We'll go after the students." "You guys should go on ahead without me," Fat Gum reluctantly said. "I'll catch up when I can, but I'm just going to slow the rest of you down." The other heroes nodded and hurried off. Unlike his faster peers, Fat Gum noticed something as he jogged down the tunnel after them. The door wasn't guarded, but it was locked from the outside. In Fat Gum's experience, a door was only locked inside a guarded compound if there was something valuable inside. More attention-grabbing was a small sign hanging from the doorknob, with a message written in sloppy kanji and decorated with smiley faces. "Tell the police to stop losing these." Intrigued, Fat Gum opened the door. What he saw made his eyes go wide. "Well, I'll be damned." The entire room shook and twisted as if it was a living thing. Because, in fact, it was. Irinaka had used his quirk, Mimic, to possess the walls, floor, and ceiling. Normally, he could only take over something as large as a refrigerator, but with Trigger pumping through him, that limit was greatly reduced, and his control over his new body made him incredibly dangerous. Had the heroes only been fighting him, they would have had a serious problem. But there was also Chisaki, Kirono, and the expendables in the room. That meant that Irinaka couldn't go all out without hurting his master. However, he was still causing problems for most of the heroes. The floor bucked and heaved, making it extremely hard for them to maintain their footing. Even those who could fly, mostly Uravity and Nezu-chan, weren't immune to the danger, because Irinaka could turn chunks of the room into roiling tendrils that threatened to crush them. Irinaka wasn't the only one to use Trigger. Hojo-yu, a burly man whose quirk let him grow crystals all over his body, could now launch them like harpoons, and even make rudimentary weapons in his hands out of the substance. Katsukime's quirk allowed him to absorb the life force of those who touched him, which increased his size and strength. But with Trigger, he could affect people within 20 feet of him. The latter's power was the biggest threat for the heroes, especially in the confined quarters, but again, the close proximity of the other 8 Precepts members helped balance things out. Tangi in particular nearly collapsed when Katsukime got too close, and that made his barriers flicker. With the risk posed by Katsukime, the heroes focused on him first. Nezu-chan charged up her quirk and unleashed it in a massive spiral that bowled the giant over. The force of the blast sent him crashing through a wall, which caused Irinaka to growl in pain as his new body was damaged, and drove him back before he harmed anyone too much. After that, the heroes stuck to the plan. Cellophane went after Setsuno and fired a line of tape. Setsuno's sword cut through part of it, but that was only to get the blade out of the way. Cellophane shot another strand that looped around the man's head, covering his eyes. Without being able to see, the man couldn't use his quirk, which meant that the biggest potential threat to Midoriya was temporarily neutralized. Cellophane was about to swing across to knock Setsuno out, but the undulating ceiling made him overshoot and crash near Chisaki. Hanta, move. Genesis created a javelin from her hand and hurled it at Chisaki in one fluid motion. She was disappointed, but not surprised. when he caught it in one hand and disintegrated the pointed end in one swift motion. It did, however, buy Cellophane the time he needed to attach some tape to the far wall and drag himself out of Chisaki's range. From there, everyone moved, and everything happened at once. Genesis created a shield to block Kirono's arrow-shaped hair, which lashed out at her like a nest of cobras. The two began a dance of sorts, darting around the rapidly shifting battlefield. Kirono slashed at Genesis' shield, while also trying to avoid the small explosives she created from her legs as she moved. "You threatened the boss," Kirono hissed. "I'm going to make you suffer for that. All I have to do is hit you once, and then you're going to watch as I skin you alive. Then I just have to make sure you don't hit me," Genesis retorted. She tossed a flashbang grenade over her shield and closed her eyes an instant before it exploded. Kirono wasn't so lucky, and blindly lashed out with his clock hand hair. Genesis dropped her shield and ran in low. She slid on her knees to cover the last few feet between them, and barely avoided having her scalp sliced open on the way. When she stood up, she had already created a set of brass knuckles on each hand. Each blow was aimed at vulnerable spots, like joints and stomach. She even managed to land a punch to Kirono's groin, which doubled him over long enough for Genesis to drive her knee into his face. It cracked one of the lenses of his mask, and she thought she heard his nose break, even as she realized how dangerous her position was. As close as they now were, Genesis had no time to create something to protect herself from Kirono's hair, which slashed across her thigh. She hadn't even hit the ground before his quirk, chronostasis, began to affect her. She was now nearly frozen, her body only able to move at the barest fraction of what she was capable of. "That hurt," Kirono said, his voice muffled with pain. "I only hit you with my minute hand, so this won't last long, but all your friends are too busy to stop me from cutting your pretty head off." Genesis furiously thought about her options, but she could barely blink, much less fight. She needed an opening. More than that, she needed a miracle. As if the universe heard her thoughts, the entire room trembled, and then every inch of the floor, ceiling, and walls were covered in ice. No, Genesis realized that the ice didn't cover the room, but had emerged from around it, as if it was being cryogenically frozen. The sudden loss of footing made Kirono slip, which bought Genesis precious seconds to use her greatest weapon, not her quirk, but her mind. She recalled everything she knew about chronostasis and a hypothesis Midoriya had proposed, the very reason she was made the ideal choice to fight Kirono in the first place. "You could also fight Nemoto," Midoriya had admitted, "but he'll just keep asking you what you're about to do, and being forced to answer could interfere with your ability to quickly create something. Even if it doesn't, he'll still know what your next move is, and he'll be able to avoid it. Better leave him to someone else." "Then how do I fight Kirono?" Yaoyorozu asked. Midoriya's smile was fierce. "Well, every report about his quirk says that it just slows down the body, not the mind. Your quirk relies on just a supply of lipids, and your mind. As long as you have an opening, I can still win," Genesis thought fiercely as Kirono's head lined up perfectly with her outstretched hand. Chisaki's right-hand man could only watch as helplessly as his would-be victim as a long pole, topped by a metal fist, shot out of her palm at considerable speed. There was a crack as it connected with his skull. He stumbled drunkenly, spun around once, and collapsed. Genesis kept her eyes on him as she waited for chronostasis to wear off. Once it did, she stood up, the gash on her thigh burned. But she ignored the pain as she limped over to Kirono with a pair of freshly created handcuffs. Her part in this fight, at least, was over, but she was satisfied that she had won her fight. "Where are you planning to strike me?" "In your gut." Red Riot grimaced as Nemoto rolled out of the way at the last second, just like the last 10 times. Forcing him to answer every question gave Nemoto just enough time to stay out of his reach. Before he could think about trying to attack again, Nemoto drew a pistol and fired twice. Had Red Riot not hardened his entire body at the last second, he would have died instantly from a bullet to the brain and the heart. As it was, the shots ricocheted into the floor and ceiling. A moment later, Red Riot was smashed to the ground by a tendril of ceiling waved around by Irinaka. "Come on, just hold out as long as you can," he thought. "Remember what Midoriya told you. Most of our moves require us to focus, and Nemoto can draw that out of us," Midoriya had said. "But you can hold him in place, keep him distracted and focused on you." "Okay, but how does that let me beat him?" Kirishima had asked. "One of two things will happen. Either you'll outlast him and take him down, or one of us will finish our own fights and hit him while he's distracted. Both scenarios require you to be unbreakable." Kirishima had grinned. "Oh, I can do that." Red Riot knew that he could outlast almost anyone in a battle of stamina. He had intentionally allowed the strongest members of his class, specifically Bakugo, Ida, and Midoriya's physically focused transformations, to hit him as often as possible during training. After taking one beating after another from Wrath, he knew that his quirk had grown strong enough to take all but the most terrible of hits. And Nemoto Shin was not a heavy hitter. Maybe I can throw him off his game, he thought. It'll probably only last a second, but that's all I'll need. He reached deep inside himself, dredging up every ounce of strength and willpower he had. His body creaked and groaned as bones, muscle and skin turned harder than stone. His teeth and hair looked more like ragged chunks of rock, and his fingers sharpened into wicked claws. What is that? Nemoto demanded as Red Riot looked more like a demon than a human. I am Red Riot held his arms out. Unbreakable. Nemoto tried to backpedal, but the young hero was on him. He was no faster than before, if anything. His increased density made him slower, but Red Riot had surprise on his side. He pinned Nemoto's arms to his sides in a bear hug and tackled him to the floor. Nemoto struggled in his grip, but that soon stopped when Red Riot slammed his head into the Yakuzas. He did it again and again, only stopping when blood trickled out from underneath his mask, but Nemoto was still fighting. Red Riot pinned his forearm against Nemoto's throat, then used his other fist to punch him in the chest with all the force of a wrecking ball. He knew he should have felt bad about breaking Nemoto's ribs, but he really didn't. After studying the man's file, he knew that Nemoto would have backed Chisaki's plan to kidnap and torture a little girl to the hilt. As far as he was concerned, breaking some of this monster's bones was a light punishment. Finally, when Nemoto's only movement was ragged breathing, Red Riot stood up and cut his quirk. He still had a few seconds of time left, which meant that he hadn't pushed himself too far. If he gave himself a minute to rest, he might even be able to use Unbreakable again, if only for a short burst. No time to rest, he decided. I can go help someone else. Before he could choose who to help, the entire room trembled, and everything began to freeze. Red Riot shivered, and wished he had at least a shirt. What the heck did Todoroki do? Virtus vaulted over Hojo, barely avoiding a spike of crystal that had been aiming for his head. He then ducked under Tabe's snapping jaws, and rewarded the maniac with a swift kick to the leg. Hojo tried to go after Virtus again, but Sun Eater caught him by the ankles with a massive tentacle and dragged him off. You're fighting me, Sun Eater reminded Hojo. We're not done yet. High on trigger, Hojo only growled and slashed apart the tentacle with his crystals. That was the last Virtus saw before he had to dart away again, Tabe hot on his heels. Of all of Chisaki's enforcers, Tabe was the last Virtus wanted to fight. The man disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. His quirk, food, allowed him to chew through almost anything and digest it just as fast. The problem for him was that his metabolism was so fast that he never felt full, and it had driven him insane. Sadly for him, his family had been against quirk-suppressing methods that might have helped their son, and instead tried to force him to control his quirk. That had only lasted a few years. Then Tabe ate them. Come and get me, monster, Virtus taunted as he ran. Eat. Drool dripped down Tabe's mask as he sprinted after his prey. Eat. He may be insane, but his reflexes are good, Virtus thought. I'll have one shot at a finishing blow. I just need to build up enough speed. That was easier said than done. The room was large, but not large enough for him to build up enough momentum. He could try running laps around the room instead, but as his near miss with Hojo had shown, the risk of running into another fight was too great. Then he had an idea. It was dangerous, and not a little crazy. In short, it was something a hero would do. Tabe has the same weaknesses as any normal human being, Midoriya had said, after everyone had taken a breath after reading Tabe's file. The dangerous part is his mouth. Take that out, and he's no longer a threat. His file suggests that his mouth is far more durable than normal, Ida pointed out. There's more than one way to stop someone from biting. Just knock the wind out of him, and he'll be too busy gasping to do anything else. Recipro extend. Virtus charged towards the nearest wall, engines at full power. Tabe continued to chase him, but paused in confusion when Virtus shifted, and then rocketed up the wall. He then reached the ceiling, shifted again, and aimed himself straight at Tabe, who was so surprised that he couldn't react in time. Virtus flew at just under the speed of sound and snapped out a kick that connected solidly with Tabe's chest. The air was forced from the man's lungs, and more than one rib snapped from the force of the blow. Tabe gasped, futilely trying to fill his lungs with air as he weakly shook on the ground. Virtus almost paused to pity the man, but knew that even a few broken ribs wouldn't stop him for long. Instead, using the last of his Recipro extend, he drove his foot into Tabe's head to knock him out. Virtus had just enough time to take a breath, satisfied that he had quickly finished his fight. And then the room trembled, and ice began to coat everything. I hope Triumph is all right, he said to himself. For now, I should find someone else to assist. You're a quick one, aren't you? Rappa laughed as he unleashed blow after blow. Fortunately for Froppy, she was able to keep just out of his reach, and whenever he got too close for comfort, she jumped over to the nearest wall, or even the ceiling. Either move was still risky, because Irinaka could easily swat her aside, but most of his attacks were now focused on triumph. Come on, just say something, Rappa demanded. If this fight is gonna last long, at least tell me your name. Froppy hopped away again, determined not to say anything. If she could throw Rappa off his game, even a little, then that could provide an opening for her. She knew she would only have one shot, and if she mistimed it, Rappa would crush her. What are his weaknesses? His legs, of course. Izuku already mentioned that. What else do I have that can work against him? He's ridiculously strong, and he's tough enough to use that strength without hurting himself. I could kick him all day and probably not hurt him. Should I just keep him busy until I can get help? No, the longer this takes, the more chances there are of someone getting hurt. Froppy leaped to the side to avoid another barrage of punches. These were so close that she could feel the air pressure against her leg. There is something I can do, but it's risky, she thought. Not just for me, but for him. Then again, he's so tough that he could probably take it. Froppy jumped up to the ceiling and rolled up one sleeve to get what she needed. Then, with a steadying breath, she leaped down to Rappa's level. You want to fight, Ribbit? Froppy crouched low. Come and get me. Now that's what I like to hear. Rappa charged, one arm drawn back. Again, Froppy jumped away, but this time, her tongue shot out and lashed against Rappa's arms, one after the other. It was barely a tap, and it was lightning fast, but Rappa was an experienced fighter. He grabbed the tongue and swung Froppy around like a wrecking ball. He spun around once, twice, and then hurled her into the wall. She managed to avoid hitting her head, and she didn't think anything was broken. But it hurt. I like your attitude, Frog Girl, Rappa said as he loomed over her. Too bad you didn't have the power to back it up. Maybe not. Froppy wiped away the blood that trickled down her chin. She had cut the inside of her mouth on her teeth. But I'm smarter than you, Ribbit. Rappa laughed, but before he could throw his fatal punch, his arm slumped limply to his side. What the hell? What's going on? Froppy pushed herself to her feet. I can do anything a frog can do, Ribbit. She nodded to herself as Rappa's other arm went limp. That includes producing paralyzing toxins. I coated my tongue with them before I hit you. It's a good thing you're strong. If you were a normal human, this might have killed you. That's Rappa slumped to his knees as the toxins pushed further through his body. That's not fair. Froppy allowed just a bit of her anger to slip its leash as she leaned in close. You want a fair fight, Ribbit? Maybe you shouldn't have let your boss kidnap and torture a little girl. Before Rappa could reply, Froppy drew back one leg and kicked him as hard as she could in the temple. Between that and the toxins, he was out like a light. Before she could even think to celebrate her victory, the room shook, and then ice coated the floor, walls, and ceiling. She immediately began to shiver as her physiology reacted badly to the sudden cold, and only the heating of her nanotech costume prevented her from entering hibernation. You're my friend, Shoto, but sometimes I really hate your quirk, Ribbit, she muttered. Suneater grimaced as Hojo carved apart more of his tentacles. He was starting to run low on the food he'd eaten, and his opponent wasn't giving him the chance to eat more. He couldn't even distract the man with words. Not that he was any good at banter, because the trigger had turned him into a rabid animal. Hojo's crystals continued to grow at a rapid pace until his entire body was covered. He looked like a bizarre nightmare version of Diamond Head. Fortunately, Suneater had sparred against Diamond Head more than once. Midoriya had proven to be a difficult opponent because he was analytical and used tactics. All Hojo had was raw aggression and no restraint. Suneater dodged another headlong charge, then wrapped a tentacle around Hojo's leg. With a grunt, he heaved Hojo up, then down with impressive force. The crystals surrounding Hojo's body cracked, and even shattered in some places. That's another thing Diamond Head is better at, Suneater thought. This guy's crystals aren't as durable. Hojo roared as new crystals replaced the old, and he charged again. Suneater smashed him aside with a clamshell on one hand, then grabbed the back of his head with a crab claw on the other. He dragged Hojo along the ground, then slammed him against the nearest wall. Hojo flailed about, but only managed a few glancing blows that Suneater ignored as he continued using the man as a living battering ram. Crystals broke and fell to the ground like hail. Some of them jabbed painfully into Suneater's feet, but only until he manifested 6 crab legs, which he used to brace himself and protect against the shrapnel. Finally, after what felt like forever, Hojo stopped struggling. His crystals receded, and Suneater could see how much damage he'd done. The man's arms and legs were broken, and blood poured from his nose and mouth. The surgical mask he'd worn had fallen off early in the fight, allowing Suneater a good view of a mouth without many teeth left. Suneater would be the first to admit that he wasn't fond of hurting people, but he didn't feel as bad as he might have. Hojo had become a deranged monster because of the trigger and would have killed anyone he could reach. Besides, after some reconstructive surgery, he could look forward to a nice, comfortable cell in Tartarus to recover in. Suneater saw Nejire-chan still fighting against Katsukame, but before he could scuttle over to help her, he was nearly thrown off his 6-pointed feet when the room trembled. Ice coated the floor, and he stumbled. Not far away, he saw Katsukame swat his girlfriend out of the air, and she vanished behind a cluster of spikes jutting from the ground. Nejire, Cellophane swung through the air, timed his approach, and let go. Unfortunately, Setsuno saw the kick coming and rolled out of the way. He lashed out with his sword, and only a desperate leap backwards saved him from getting his head cut off. He still got slashed across the chest. It hurt, but it was shallow, and it didn't stop him from moving. "You're gonna regret that trick you pulled with that tape," Setsuno shouted. "The only thing I'm regretting is not knocking you out already," Cellophane grunted, jaw locked from the pain. Setsuno laughed and held out his free hand. Cellophane's helmet was ripped off his head and flew towards the Yakuza. He was surprised long enough that Setsuno was able to line up a clean shot and threw the helmet back in his face. Cellophane saw stars, and he thought his nose broke under the impact, but he shot a line of tape up and pulled himself to a safe distance. "I'm really starting to hate this guy," Cellophane thought as he wiped blood from his nose. "Okay, let's see if I can't play to my strengths." Cellophane fired one line of tape after another. Half was used to pull himself around in the air, while the other half landed in clumps and strips all around Setsuno, limiting his movement. He tried to cut his way clear, but enough bits of tape clung to the blade that it started to cause some issues. It got even worse for Setsuno when he took his attention off Cellophane for 1 second too long. And that was all he needed to tape Setsuno's foot to the ground, then used another strand of tape to rip the sword out of his hand. "Now you know how it feels," Cellophane shouted, then taped the sword to the ceiling. "His quirk only works on stuff on me, so as long as I keep his weapon out of his hands, I'm good." Setsuno dove for a pistol that had fallen to the ground during the chaos, but the tape around his foot tripped him up, and he handed on even more tape. A few seconds later, and Cellophane had practically cocooned the man, tying him up to his nose in tape. After a moment of consideration, he knocked Setsuno out with a swift kick to the temple, and tried not to feel self-satisfied. He was about to head in the direction of Genesis to see if she needed help with Kirono, but the room suddenly shook and then started to freeze over. "I am not ready for winter, Shoto," he grumbled. Alien Queen scowled as she skated around yet another barrier in her path. Tangi was a defensive fighter and needed allies to really do damage, but he was just as capable of slowing someone down as he was protecting someone else. She wanted nothing more than to fight Chisaki, but Tangi kept getting in her way, and it was starting to make her angry. Well, angrier Ishida wasn't someone who fell into a rage, but she had been nursing her hatred of Chisaki possibly even more than Midoriya or Irinaka. She loved Iri and had been heartbroken when she caught a glimpse of the girl's scars, and when she'd learned who was responsible, she had genuinely contemplated murder. It wouldn't be hard to pull off. Ever since discovering her quirk, counselors had cautioned her to be extra careful. One wrong step, and she could easily become a villain. Half the reason her parents had supported her joining the hero course was because it would teach her valuable self-control. However, in the face of her hatred, all that discipline was thrown out the window, and the only reason she couldn't go after her real target was because of annoying creep in a bird mask. "Fine," she thought when another barrier diverted her path yet again. "I'll take him down first, then help Midori." "You cannot hurt me," Tangi boasted. "Your acid is powerful, but my barriers are not something that can be melted away." That was true. Though solid, Tengi's barriers didn't have anything for her acid to break down. Alien Queen had learned this the first time, but she had been distracted by her anger. When it cooled down, just a little, she remembered the strategy meeting with her friends. "Tengi's barriers are strong, but he can't move while he uses them," Midoriya had said. "And they don't have a floor, they're just domes. If someone keeps him distracted, someone else can dig underneath the barriers to take him down." "Who would be good for the digging part?" Irinaka had asked. "Well, I think Mirio could just walk through the barriers, but I could get underneath Tengi as Armadillo." "Another good option would be me," Alien Queen thought fiercely. Still, she didn't have someone to distract Tengi, so she improvised. She aimed one palm at the top of the barrier Tengi was using to shield himself, and sprayed as much acid as she could. She made the viscosity as thick as possible as it covered the half bubble, to distort his vision through the transparent barrier, and hopefully disguise her real objective. With her other hand, she pointed at the ground just outside the barrier. She hosed the ground with her strongest acid, melting a hole in the floor. Then, as fast as she could, she jumped into the makeshift tunnel. She prayed that Tangi didn't move as she covered herself in acid and practically swam through the ground, then aimed up. She hoped she had measured correctly, and the burst up from underground. Sure enough, she was inside the barrier. Tangi stumbled, the first time he had lost his composure. Alien Queen threw a punch with a fist coated in acid, but Tangi managed to block it with a small barrier over his outstretched hand. It saved him that time, but she was inside his reach now. She dropped a glob of weak acid on his foot. It didn't even damage him, but it scared him, and gave her the opening she needed to strike him in the jaw with her elbow. Alien Queen kicked him in the side. Another strike to the face, this time with an acid just strong enough to make his eyes sting. Lie away. In desperation, Tangi wrapped his own fist in a barrier and lashed out blindly. He managed to catch Alien Queen in the jaw, even as she kicked him in the kidney. He fell to the ground, barely conscious, and Alien Queen staggered back. Just before she could recover, Irinaka swept around a column of stone that hit her in the head. She heard a shout of denial, and as her vision went dark, she wondered why the floor was so cold. Nezu-chan groaned and brought a hand to her head. She jerked it back when her skull was lanced with white-hot pain, and it came away bloody. "I need to stop getting hit in the head," she mumbled. She was confused when the room suddenly got darker, and it took her half a second to realize that it wasn't that the lights were going out, but that Katsuki was looming over her. Rather than just pulverize her, he seemed content to just stand there as his trigger-boosted quirk affected her. With the drug coursing through him, he didn't need direct contact. Anyone who came close would have their energy stolen. "Thanks for that," Katsuki rumbled, as his muscle bulged and he grew a few inches taller. "You've got a lot of energy, girly. I can't wait to see how strong I get when I take it all." Nezu-chan tried to ready her own quirk, but her bell had been well and truly rung, and she couldn't even get to her feet. It didn't help that she could feel her stamina draining with every second. Katsuki raised his foot to step closer, but his entire body was suddenly engulfed in enormous tentacles. "Get away from her," Sun Eater shouted, as angry as Nezu-chan had ever seen. Both his arms were a mass of tentacles, and his feet were giant talons that dug into the floor and gave him leverage. Nezu-chan felt a surge of hope when Sun Eater dragged Katsuki back, but a few seconds later, the tentacles went slack, and Sun Eater fell to his knees. "Nice try, kid," Katsuki taunted. "But grabbing me was the dumbest thing you could have done. I'm all charged up, and now I'm gonna squash you like a bug." Sun Eater weakly turned his head towards Nezu-chan. "I'm sorry." Seeing her boyfriend like that, helpless and about to die, was a waking nightmare for Nezu-chan. They had all come here to rescue Eri, and dying in the process was not part of the plan. Adrenaline, fear, and anger pushed her concussion aside, and she rose to her feet. Swirling energy gathered in her hands, brighter and more powerful than anything she had summoned before. "You won't touch him," Nezu-chan growled, and aimed her hands up. "You won't touch him." Katsuki looked back, only to get a face full of barely controlled energy that sent him rocketing up, clean through the ceiling, the compound above, and out into the open. Nezu-chan wouldn't find out until later, but Katsuki landed headfirst on a fire hydrant, knocking him out instantly. Nezu-chan collapsed. She had used more energy in a single blast than she usually used in a whole day of intensive training. She felt like she could barely move, which was annoying, because she was lying on a floor covered in ice. Nezu. With a Herculean effort, she looked up to see Sun Eater also collapsed after direct contact with Katsuki. "Yeah, Tamaki." Sun Eater dragged himself over so that he could grab her hand. "That was really cool." Nezu-chan smiled, even as her vision darkened again. "Thanks, I'm gonna take a nap now." She was unconscious before her head hit the floor. Uravity barely avoided another tendril of stone as she flew towards Sakaki. She could have ended her fight earlier, but she had to constantly dodge Irinaka's flailing, which was even harder when he could attack her from all directions. Funnily enough, Sakaki was the easiest part of her battle. His quirk, sloshed, impacted his victim's equilibrium, but it was having almost no effect on her. Her arm had been created to counteract her own quirk's side effect, which meant that the worst Sakaki could do to her was make her a little nauseous. She had done worse to herself for years. "How come you're not sloshed?" Sakaki demanded, then hiccuped and downed a whole bottle of sake in a few seconds. "You should enjoy the party, girl." Uravity scowled and leaned left to avoid a knife, which Sakaki had hurled with uncanny skill, and made her wonder how much of his behavior was an act. "No thanks," she called out. "I don't think I'm a drinking girl." That seemed to offend Sakaki, because he threw 4 more knives, each of which barely missed. You're gonna be so boring when you get older. He cackled. If you live that long, of course. Being a hero is exciting enough, Uravity said, mostly to herself. I don't mind a boring home life. Keep him talking, she thought. I just need to find an opening, and I can take him down, just like Deku-kun said. I'm positive you can take down Chisaki, Midoriya had said. Even if your arm doesn't compensate for his quirk, you're the best close combat specialist for dealing with him, since you know how to deal with nausea better than any of us. He's right, Yaoyorozu had added. The rest of us have our targets, and none of us can deal with something like Sloshed. If Chisaki isn't taken down quickly, he could interfere in all our fights, putting us in serious danger. Your job is simple, but one of the most important, Midoriya had continued. You have to beat Chisaki and get him away from the rest of us as quickly as possible. Irinaka's hands were balled into fists. I will. I promise. I have a job to do, and I'm not going to let my team down. Uravity flew low, nearly skimming the ground. Chisaki saw her coming and threw another brace of knives. Some missed, 2 bounced off her wings, and 1 grazed her helmet. A final knife, hurled in desperation, sank almost to the hilt in her left bicep. The pain was terrible, but Uravity had momentum and adrenaline pushing her forward. She reoriented so that she was hovering perpendicular to the floor, flaring her wings to slow down, and curled her legs up to her chest. As she got close to Chisaki, she kicked out with both feet. She connected solidly with his chest, knocking him onto his back. I've got him. Uravity cancelled her quirk and landed on top of Chisaki. He flailed about with his remaining knife, but she had received plenty of training from Gunhead about how to deal with that. She quickly disarmed him, then proceeded to punch him over and over. His drunkenness dulled his sense of pain, and it took several minutes for her to practically dismantle him. Finally, once she was sure the fight was over, she stood. She was panting heavily, and blood soaked her left arm. She thought about pulling the knife out, but knew that would make things worse. At least I didn't lose the other arm, she muttered. Despite the pain and loss of blood, she determined that she could still help, and looked around to see where she would be most useful. However, just as she was about to head over to help Froppy in her fight, she heard a shout, and then felt a rumble. A moment later, the room froze over, and the sudden cold turned the blood on her sleeve to red ice. I do not like that, she muttered. What did Shoto just do? Triumph knew that his job was important. From the beginning, everyone had known that Trigger might come into play, and of all the 8 precepts, there were 3 who were the most terrifying under its effect. Fortunately, only one of them had used it. Unfortunately, he was the one fighting him. While powered up on Trigger, Irinaka's quirk basically made an entire room an enemy combatant, which put the entire team at risk. Not even Midoriya had been sure if he could deal with Irinaka if that happened. But Triumph had stepped up to volunteer. Besides, he knew that Midoriya wanted to fight Chisaki more than any of them, and Triumph wasn't going to begrudge his friend that. That didn't mean fighting Irinaka was any less irritating, though. While Triumph could shoot bursts of fire or columns of ice, he couldn't go all out, for fear of hurting his friends because of a loss of control. Irinaka didn't have that problem. Though high on Trigger, his control was nearly perfect, and he could lash out within inches of a teammate, while being scarily accurate against an enemy. The one good thing was that Irinaka had trouble targeting more than one person at a time, and Triumph had his immediate attention. For everyone else he tried to attack, it was more like random flailing. You can't stop us, Irinaka bellowed. A bunch of children won't prevent the rise of the Yakuza. Triumph just narrowed his eyes and shot another burst of flame at where he thought Irinaka's real body might be, only for the fire to splash against the wall with little effect. He'd tried freezing the room, but Irinaka merely shifted the entire structure, like a shrub, shattering the layer of ice. If only I could freeze him from the inside out, Triumph thought as he jumped back to avoid a claw made of stone. That would stop him, but I don't know where to strike for that to work. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of pink. He risked a glance to the side, and saw Alien Queen trying to help Deku fight Chisaki. On the way, she was blocked by Tangi, and the two fought. Triumph wasn't too worried. His girlfriend was more than enough to take down Tangi. That changed when a lucky strike from Irinaka caught her in the head. Triumph felt his blood run cold when he saw blood fly through the air, and then Alien Queen hit the ground. Mina, with a cold hatred now coursing through him, Triumph didn't hesitate. There had been one way to freeze Irinaka, but he hadn't taken it, because of the risk to himself. The primary goal of a hero for a villain fighting scenario was to defeat said villain as quickly as possible, with as little collateral damage or injury as could be managed. Self-damaging strategies were actively discouraged, unless all other options had been exhausted. Were there other options? Probably, but Triumph didn't care anymore. The next time Irinaka reached for him, he didn't dodge or block with a column of ice. Instead, he let his right arm be engulfed in stone. Even as his wrist cracked and broke, he unleashed a frozen hell. Absolute zero, he said through gritted teeth. Ice Age. In an instant, the walls, floor and ceiling were frozen from the inside. Irinaka tried to escape before being frozen, but he only got halfway out of a wall before freezing over. Triumph could tell that he wasn't dead, but he would probably suffer hypothermia if he didn't get medical attention soon. At least all that ice numbed my wrist, he thought as he pulled his arm free. That's going to hurt later. Wait, Mina. Leaving Irinaka alone for now, he jogged over to his girlfriend. She was alive, but unconscious. Blood streamed down her scalp, turning her pink hair purple. Triumph gently cradled her with his good arm. But as he looked around for someone to help him, he nearly fell over when the room trembled again. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew the cause by the rapid flashes of green light. Finish this, Izuku. Deku hated Chisaki so much that it almost hurt. All he could think about was putting that monster down, and it took all his self-control not to make it permanent. Of course, that made his fight much harder. As long as Chisaki still had hands, he could use Overhaul to repair any damage Deku did to him. And Deku was doing a lot. Every time Chisaki tried to impale him with spikes formed from the floor, he would turn into Ghost Freak to avoid them, and then retaliate with lightning from Buzzshock. However, Chisaki would fight through the pain to repair the damage to his skin and nerves, and they would do it all over again. Sometimes, Chisaki would try to rush in close, hand outstretched to reduce Deku to a smear on the floor. When that happened, Deku would turn into Big Chill, using his intangibility to avoid getting killed and counterattacking with blasts of frost. He had considered using Heat Blast to deter Chisaki, but he stopped after the first time. Chisaki had powered through the heat, using his quirk to constantly regenerate his burnt skin, and Deku had been forced to retreat as he got close. "I'm not stupid," Chisaki said, his voice eerily calm. "I saw that ghost thing you turn into during the sports festival. I won't let you get close enough to possess me." Ghost Freak decided to try anyway, but Chisaki put his hand on the ground, hiding himself from view with a wall that erupted up in front of him. By the time Ghost Freak passed through the wall, Chisaki had vanished in a tunnel. Ghost Freak wisely decided to remain intangible, which saved his life when Chisaki burst up from underground and would have killed him instantly. "He's getting used to my movements, and he probably knows about most of my alien's powers," Ghost Freak thought sourly. "I guess there's a downside to being famous." "You've inconvenienced me," Chisaki went on. "You're only delaying the inevitable. I'll kill you, heal my men, and take Yuri back. Once I have her, I'll harvest her over and over until I have what I need to cure this world of quirks forever." Deku turned into Heat Blast and unleashed a wave of fire before he even knew what he was doing. "You won't lay a finger on her again, you monster." Chisaki created an angular shield out of the concrete floor, diverting the worst of the flames away from him, while simultaneously healing his burns. "I'm a monster. I'm not the one who transforms in so many ways that they can barely be considered human. You don't even see it, do you? You're so enamored with being a hero that you can't see how quirks are destroying this world. They're a plague, a stain on humanity's genetic purity. I'm just correcting an evolutionary defect. Don't make it seem like you're on some noble quest." Heat Blast spat. "You tortured a little girl to create a weapon. Also, your criminal friends could have some respect again. That's just pathetic." Chisaki's eye twitched. "Don't you call everything I've worked for pathetic, you idiotic child? I am saving this world, and if I have to kill Iri and bring her back 1,000 times to do it, I will." Deku knew he was telling the truth, and that scared him. Chisaki was completely dedicated to his cause, though whether or not he had merely used it as a rallying cry was unknown. And, really, Deku didn't care about that. All that mattered to him was that Chisaki would never stop trying to take Iri from the people who loved her. Not for the first time, Deku wondered if he would have to kill this man. Chisaki sent another wave of spikes at Heat Blast, then dashed out of cover. When Heat Blast saw that he was running in Red Riot's direction, he flew after him. He thought that Chisaki was going to try to kill one of his friends, but he was wrong. Chisaki skidded to a halt by the unconscious Nemoto and put his hands on the man's chest. "Sorry," Chisaki said, though he didn't sound sorry in the slightest. "I need a little more power to kill this pest." Heat Blast stopped when, to his horror, both Chisaki and Nemoto abruptly exploded. He watched with morbid fascination as the two men literally merged into one being. He mostly looked like Chisaki, but he now had an extra pair of larger arms, made of dark flesh and lines of blood, and his beak-shaped mask looked organic. "How many transformations do you have?" Chisaki asked him in a double-toned voice. 53, Heat Blast immediately replied, then clapped his hand over his mouth. Somehow, combining with Nemoto had given Chisaki a second quirk. Chisaki put one of his 4 hands on the ground. Heat Blast was so shocked by this development that he didn't react in time, and was hurled into the far wall by a column of stone. He wasn't badly hurt, just stunned long enough that he was unable to stop Chisaki from reaching another of his fallen men. This time, it was Rappa. Again, there was an explosion of gore, and Chisaki now had a 3rd set of arms, even larger than the 2nd pair. He also had the same dark flesh around his calves and feet, which now looked like talons, and his hair was wild and longer. Heat Blast fired another column of flame, but Chisaki charged right into it, blocking the fire with his newest arms. When he stepped in close, Heat Blast thought he was about to be destroyed, but Chisaki's new arms got in the way of his originals. Instead of immediately killing him, Chisaki punched him 100 times in only a second. He can't use his original quirk through his new hands, Heat Blast realized, and I think he can only use his new quirks through the new parts of his body. As Deku racked his brain to counter this, he was again too slow to stop Chisaki. He propelled himself backwards on a stone platform and landed next to Kirono. This time, Genesis, who had seen his previous transformations, was close enough to try to intervene. She created a stun gun and raised it, but Chisaki was faster. One of his Rappa arms swung out and smashed into her side. There was a sickening crack as several ribs broke, and then Genesis was sent hurtling across the room, trailing blood as she flew. No more. No one else is getting hurt today. Heat Blast turned into XLR8 and charged. Chisaki had already merged with Kirono, and now his mane of hair had become a twisting mass of arrows that lashed out. Just before the Kirono hairs touched him, XLR8 turned into Diamond Head. The arrows couldn't cut him, which meant that the quirk couldn't affect him. Diamond Head stabbed Chisaki through one of his 6 shoulders, the lowest of the 3 pairs, and the easiest to reach, because Chisaki had gained so much mass at this point that he was almost 10 feet tall. Chisaki grunted from the pain, but then used his Rappa arms to pummel Diamond Head into the ground. He reached out with his overhaul hands to utterly destroy Diamond Head, but he turned into Big Chill and sank into the ground just in time. Deku wanted nothing more than a few minutes to process everything Chisaki had done, and what he was capable of, but Chisaki wasn't giving him that time. He used Overhaul again to turn the ground around him into a crater, exposing Big Chill. Deku also knew that he couldn't afford to strategize anymore anyway. If he gave himself room to breathe, he would give Chisaki the same luxury. That would give him time to assimilate more of his men, and more of Deku's friends would end up like Genesis. Big Chill nearly had a heart attack when he saw Chisaki going for Katsukame. This time, the unconscious Nejire-chan and Sun Eater were directly in his way, and Chisaki wasn't above killing someone he perceived as an obstacle. At the speed of thought, Deku turned into Echo Echo and screamed. The sonic wave knocked away the unconscious heroes, saving them from Chisaki's outstretched overhaul hand. Instead, that hand landed on Katsukame. The explosion that followed was much larger than the ones before, and when the gore rematerialized into one being, Deku stopped seeing Chisaki as human. He was huge, easily twice as large as Katsukame had been. Instead of legs, he had a thick, sinuous tail with a torso that looked like a distended ribcage, and 2 pairs of arms that were each nearly 15 feet long. The head of Chisaki's new body was like that of a reptile's, with its jaw open and menacing. Inside the mouth was Chisaki's human upper body, moving like a bizarre tongue. Enough of this, Chisaki droned, echoing behind his voice. It sounded like several other voices were screaming in agony. You're going to die now, and I'm taking Eri. Deku's anger overtook his fear. Never going to happen. He vanished in a flash of green light. Humongosaur. I'm gonna kill those kids, Sky Dancer griped as the older heroes ran. Never should have let him off on their own. It was a calculated risk, Endeavor grunted. We do not need them to defeat Chisaki. Only hold him in place long enough for us to get there. Yeah, but did you see how mad they were? Ingenium asked. We should have had a pro stay with them the whole time to keep them in line. Endeavor didn't even look at him. I do not know about your little brother, but I know that my son will not cross that line. I trained him well enough for that. That's low, Sky Dancer muttered, then nearly tumbled out of the air when the entire compound shook again. Oh, what now? That wasn't an earthquake, was it? Deku has that armadillo form, Ingenium said. It could have been him. Underground, in a confined space. Endeavor shook his head. No, that would be irresponsible with fellow heroes in the area. The rumbling got worse, and then the tunnel in front of them exploded, not from an actual explosive, but from a pair of monstrous forms crashing upwards towards the surface. One the heroes recognized as human Gausaur, but it took them a moment to realize what the other was. Holy crap, was that Chisaki? Sky Dancer blinked. Since when can he turn himself into a monster? Endeavor made a snap decision. Ingenium, Sky Dancer, continue forward and find the other students. I will go after Deku and fight Chisaki. Go. Sky Dancer was about to protest, but Ingenium grabbed her shoulder and gently pushed her onward. Okay, good luck. Endeavor used fire from his feet to push himself into the air, following after the two fighters. This was not how this was supposed to go. You're gonna be just fine, Lemillion promised, and put Eri in the back of the ambulance. These nice people are going to take you to the hospital. Eri grabbed his cape. She didn't say anything, just shook her head. But Lemillion could see the fear on her face. She was still terrified of doctors, and after encountering Chisaki mere minutes ago, Lemillion didn't blame her. Hey, why don't I go with you? He asked gently. I'll stay with you until everyone else gets back. Eri's breath hitched. They won't come be back. He'll kill them, all because of me. Lemillion glanced back at Sir Night-Eye, who was speaking to someone on his phone. He caught Lemillion's look and nodded. Deku and the others are going to be fine, Lemillion promised. They told me that they would stop Chisaki, and heroes don't break their word. If anything, Chisaki was the last obstacle to this whole operation. When Night-Eye and Riku had returned to the battle on the surface, most of the 8 Precept soldiers were defeated by the heroes and police. Night-Eye was overseeing the process of securing and transporting the captured Yakuza, while Riku took command of a group of heroes to take down the remaining holdouts. Lemillion still worried about the rest of his teammates, but he kept those worried hidden behind a cheerful smile. Eri was barely holding together as it was, and it would only make things worse if he didn't show confidence. Lemillion realized then how much heavier All Might's burden had been, if he had to do that for everyone. Just as things started to quiet down, the compound rumbled again. Some of the less experienced heroes and police shouted in alarm, but everyone else simply tensed and readied for another fight. A moment later, half the Yakuza headquarters exploded outward in a shower of wood and masonry, and then the hybrid Chisaki tumbled out of the dust, followed by Human Gausaur. The former struck the latter with a giant fist, and then Human Gausaur retaliated by grabbing Chisaki by his monstrous body's throat and choke slamming him into the ground. Lemillion watched as the monster that had once been Chisaki opened its mouth, and the man reached out towards Human Gausaur. Deku transformed just in time, flying away as Jetre, even as he peppered Chisaki with energy. Chisaki tried to swat him away, and as he did, he caught sight of Eri, who was trembling in absolute terror. Eri, Chisaki hissed and reached out for her. You're coming back with me. Lemillion was exhausted, but he forced One for All to activate, and he put himself between the girl and her tormentor. Fortunately, he didn't have to do anything. Chisaki's monster hand was severed at the wrist by Diamond Head, who then turned into NRG and blasted Chisaki with radiation. Get her out of here, NRG shouted. Lemillion, get her somewhere safe. I can handle this. He's right, Night-Eye said, raising his voice to be heard. Everyone, evacuate the area. Deku is the only one who can match Chisaki now. Lemillion grabbed Eri and dove into the ambulance, then banged his fist on the driver's seat. Go, get us out of here. The paramedic didn't need to be told twice. The pro heroes could barely handle seeing a genuine monster, so the poor man didn't have a chance. He turned on the sirens and drove out as fast as he could. Lemillion grimaced. He wanted nothing more than to help Deku in his fight, but even the tiny bit of One for All he'd just used had nearly knocked him out. He had pushed himself too far, too fast, and it was coming back to bite him. Izueri's voice shook, and tears rolled down her face. Lemillion held her close, but kept watch over the fight until the ambulance turned a corner, and he couldn't see anymore. Next time, he swore, next time, I won't have to run because I wasn't strong enough. NRG swore up a storm in his head as he was smacked aside by Chisaki. It didn't hurt, but the monster was already chasing after Eri. He turned into XLR8 and got in front of Chisaki, then turned into Arctic Guana and froze Chisaki's tail to the sidewalk. Chisaki roared and severed that part of his tail. He then used Overhaul to rebuild it. He adapts too quickly, Deku realized. I have to hit him hard enough and fast enough to take him down, or he'll just keep going until he kills me. There was an option, he knew, but it was purely theoretical. He'd done minor versions of it since getting the OMNITRIX, but for what he had planned, well, he wasn't sure how it would affect him, but he definitely wasn't going to be happy when this was over. Once again, he turned into Jetre and started to fly circles around Chisaki, firing Neuroshock blasts all the while. Chisaki might have become unstable, but his instincts were sharp, and he was able to predict his flight path. Jetray barely dodged a massive hand, and then turned into Heat Blast. He threw waves of fire as he fell, then turned into Big Chill before he hit the ground, and blew ice wherever there wasn't a burn. "Stop that," Chisaki screamed. "Stop getting in my way." But Deku didn't stop. If anything, he sped up. He transformed again and again, never using the same alien too often, never creating a pattern for Chisaki to follow. Heat Blast, Eye Guy, NRG, Echo Echo, Water Hazard. He used every alien with a ranged attack, only switching to a flying alien before he fell back to Earth. Soon, it didn't look like he was staying in any form at all. To those watching the fight, it looked like a green ball of light was flying around Chisaki at incredible speeds, hitting him with everything from sound to fire to ice and everything in between. Deku was transforming at the speed of thought, pure instinct, relying on what he knew he needed, and never using it for more than a second. "I'm not Ben10. I'm not All Might or Hawks. I am the hero I choose to be. I am Deku, and this is my power." Deku flew faster and hit Chisaki even harder. The monster's flesh was burned, frozen, electrocuted, and peppered with spears of diamond. He was being hit by so much power that he was even starting to lift up into the air. "This is my ultimate move. Deku Unlimited." Forced up and back, directly over the Yakuza compound, Chisaki could only watch as Jetray turned into Way Big, who drew back a massive fist. "You lose," Way Big boomed, and punched Chisaki's monster form in the head with every ounce of strength he had. The impact shattered the overhauled flesh and then Chisaki's bones. He landed on top of what was left of the compound, utterly destroying the building, and sending a huge cloud of dust into the air. As exhausting as that had been, Deku didn't dare transform back to normal until he was sure Chisaki was down. He examined the Yakuza, and noted with no small amount of satisfaction that he was finally unconscious. He returned to his human form, and nearly collapsed. He was out of breath, sweating, and felt like he could sleep for a week. "Deku." He peered over the edge of the hole he'd made, and saw Uravity waving up at him. Amazingly, everyone else from the team was awake. Not all of them were standing, and most were hurt, but they all looked up at him expectantly. "What happened? Are you all right?" Deku took a deep breath and held back a wince when his chest ached. "It's over. We won." With that done, he let himself fall to his knees. Chisaki was defeated, and Eri was safe. The nightmare was over. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 13. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author The Incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.